Prologue. Alexis pulled the car off the highway and onto the Navajo reservation that housed the Four Corners Monument. She was with her roommate, Sydney, and their two suitemates, Joanna and Tess. The four of them had taken off immediately after graduation to scope out the area where Sydney was going to start working on June 1st. Sydney's dream had always been to be a park ranger, and she was going to do just that for Arches National Park, just north of Moab, Utah. When they reached the monument, Tess jumped out of the car. "You guys play tourist. I have got to use the ladies' room." And she was out of sight. "The girl has a pea-sized bladder," Joanna announced, voicing what they were all thinking. The four of them had shared a bathroom for their entire college careers. They were well aware of Tess's bladder issues. There were times when she was pounding on the door, needing to go immediately when someone else was in there. She was well known to the neighboring suites, because she'd begged to use their restrooms often. Alexis and Sydney walked together toward the monument, with Joanna trailing slightly behind. "I hate that this is our last trip together," Sydney said. They'd taken spring break trips together every year since they'd started college. Alexis rested her head on Sydney's shoulder. Sydney was a good head taller than Alexis, having gone to college on a volleyball scholarship. She was as athletic as Alexis was soft. Alexis was a book nerd and always had been. She was heading to graduate school in Albuquerque starting in the fall, though she wished she could take more time off than that. "It's hard to believe you're going to be in Utah, and I'm going to be in New Mexico," Joanna laughed from behind them. "Tess and I need to decide which one of us is moving to Arizona, and which will move to Colorado." Sydney and Alexis gave Joanna blank stares. "What does that mean?" Sydney asked. "Well, you're moving to two of the Four Corners states. Tess and I should move to the other two." Joanna looked over at Tess, who had just joined them. "I get Colorado." Tess laughed. "Are you sticking me with Arizona? Land of heat and old people? What kind of friend are you?" Joanna grinned. "One who likes mountains and cold weather." Tess wrinkled her nose. "I'll consider it." Alexis grinned at the others. The trip was meant to familiarize them all with the West. They'd gone to school in Binghamton, New York, and none of them had spent much if any time in the western half of the United States. "Maybe we'll all fall in love with a different state from the Four Corners, and we can have lunch together every month, meeting in the middle. Wouldn't that be awesome?" Chapter 1. 4 years later. Alexis looked around at her three closest friends during their monthly lunch near the Four Corners. "So I agreed to go out with this guy that I met at one of my counseling conferences. He's a life coach in Albuquerque. 30. Single. Seemed like a nice guy." She shook her head. "He tried to pressure me into bed on the first date. Seriously tried to follow me into my apartment after I told him no." "Are you kidding me?" Joanna asked, obviously disgusted. Sydney frowned. "I can teach you some self-defense." Joanna frowned at Alexis. "And this idiot is helping other people? Someone needs to throat punch that jerk." "I don't want to learn self-defense." Alexis sighed. "I want to meet a man worth meeting. I don't even want to date. I want to skip over all that nonsense and just get married." She was fed up with the way things went on dates anyway. Trying to find just the right man was tiresome and ridiculous. "It's too bad that's not possible. Wouldn't it be cool to be a mail-order bride?" Sydney asked. "I've been obsessing with reading mail-order bride books lately. I'm not sure why. I don't know about being a mail-order bride, but I think I'm going to contact my old boss, Dr. Lachele. You guys remember when you were laughing at me when I interned for a company called Matrimony? Well, what Dr. Lachele does is match people at the altar. You have to go through a ton of in-depth questioning, but I think it'll be worth it. I'm calling her Monday." Alexis sat quietly waiting for the fallout from her friends. She knew they'd think she was off her rocker, but who needed a rocker? So a modern-day mail-order bride situation with a little psychology to match you to the right guy thrown in? Sydney asked. "I'm in. Tell her to plan to interview the two of us. I think you've both lost your minds," Tess told them. You can't marry strangers just because you're sick of the dating scene. Watch me, Alexis said. I'm not playing games anymore. I'm 26 years old, and I'm ready to move on with my life. No meeting men in bars. No dating losers. I'm going to let Dr. Lachele make all the decisions for me, and I'm going to be a very happily married woman. Joanna just stared at her for a moment. You really think that's the answer? I don't know that there is a good answer, but this is the route I'm taking, and no one is going to talk me out of it. You've lost your ever-loving mind, Tess said, shaking her head. But I'll be happy to be a bridesmaid. Just tell me what to wear. Don't think I won't. Alexis took a sip of her raspberry lemonade, letting the flavors roll over her tongue. I'll let her know we're both interested, Sid. Anyone else? Joanna and Tess exchanged a glance, but both shook their heads. I'm not that desperate, Tess told her. I don't think I could ever be that desperate. I don't think I could do it, Joanna said. I'll watch you two and see what happens. Sydney raised her glass in a toast. To matrimony and no more ridiculous dates with even more ridiculous men. To matrimony, they all echoed. Sunday evening, right before Alexis went to bed, she got a call from Joanna. I know I'm going to regret this, but I'm in. I haven't been able to think about anything else since lunch yesterday. Tell Dr. Lachele, there will be 3 of us. You got it. Alexis couldn't help but smile. She was glad her friend was taking the bull by the horns as well. Actually, tell her 4. Tess may not go through with it, but I think she's going to regret it if she doesn't. Alexis frowned. But I get to tell her that it was your idea that she is being included against her will, right? She could just imagine how furious Tess would be about the whole thing, and she didn't want to deal with the brunt of her anger. Oh, absolutely. I'm not afraid of Tess. Joanna sounded like she was disgusted at the very thought. I'm not either. I know she could beat me up, but I'd just hold her off for the 5 minutes until she needed to run to the bathroom. Joanna laughed. Sounds good to me. Let me know when the interviews will be. I will. I know it all sounds crazy, but I really think we're making the right choice. I saw Dr. Lachele match up a lot of happy couples during the summers the first worked for her. And she'd adored working for the crazy purple-haired woman. I'll let you know how I feel about it all after I've met my guy. Okay. I'll let everyone know when she wants to interview. Thanks, Alexis. After ending the call, Alexis changed into her pajamas and climbed between the sheets. If Dr. Lachele couldn't find the man to make her happy, then he didn't exist. Alexis called first thing the next morning. It was bright and early in Albuquerque, but with the 2-hour time difference, she knew it would be fine. And she called Dr. Lachele's private line, not the office. Hello? Dr. Lachele. It's Alexis Casey. Alexis. It's so good to hear your voice. How's New Mexico treating you? It's great. I have my own practice now. I went the life coaching route instead of regular counseling. It seems to fit my abilities better. I can see that. So, what has you on my phone? You finally ready for me to find you a husband? Dr. Lachele had hounded her for years to use her services. Actually, yes. Me and 3 of my friends. Really? 4 of you? When do you want me to interview? I'm booked this weekend. Alexis frowned. Can you do it the next weekend? She knew if she waited too long, she'd lose her nerve and not be able to go through with it. I sure can. And I'm going to force you to look at baby pictures. Mercedes just gave birth to my first grandbaby. I don't have to just rely on the munchkins for grandbabies anymore. I'm sure you still love your munchkins just as much though, don't you? Lachele laughed. Well, of course. I still have those babies wallpapered all across one wall of my office. I figured as much. Alexis smiled, glad she was going to get to see the crazy woman on the other end of the line soon. You'll want to fly into Albuquerque Airport. Just let me know the time of the flight, and I'll be there to get you. Then we'll drive to meet the others. Sounds good to me. I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Dr. Lachele paused for a moment. I'll email you my flight information. I'm so excited that I get to see you. I can't wait. After hanging up the phone, Alexis grabbed a cup of coffee and sat down for a moment. She needed to let the others know, but first she was going to bask in the happiness that came with knowing her search for a suitable man was almost over. She'd always thought that by the time she'd finished grad school, there would be a man in her life that she'd never forget. It just hadn't worked out that way. Yet. On Friday of the following week, Alexis was at the Albuquerque airport waiting for Dr. Lachele. She stood in baggage claim, her eyes scanning the crowd for the purple hair that she knew was coming. When she spotted the older woman, she waved, and Dr. Lachele made a beeline for her, grabbing her in a bear hug. Finally. I felt like I'd never see you again. Alexis couldn't believe her mentor was finally there. Well, you can bet your sweet patootie, I'm here and ready to get to work with you girls. I needed a patented Alexis booby bump like I've never needed anything else. We have a long drive first. We all took 4-day weekends so we could spend the entire weekend at Four Corners, and I got us a hotel there. We'll be hanging out while you interview whomever. That sounds good. All 4 of you want to do this? Dr. Lachele asked. Well, 3 of us do, and we decided that the 4th should want to. She's agreed to talk with you, but under duress. You know I don't work that way. I do. Alexis shrugged. Final decision is up to her this weekend. If she decides not to be interviewed, then we'll have a whole day of playing. She really thought Tess would change her mind, but if she didn't, that was just fine. A day to just hang out with Dr. Lachele would be very welcome. So where are we staying? Dr. Lachele asked. There's a Marriott in Farmington, New Mexico. We're all meeting up there. The luggage from the flight had started coming around the turnstile. Let's get your stuff and get out of Dodge. It's a 4-hour drive, and I'm ready to be there. They watched and got 2 huge bags off the conveyor belt. Why so much for a weekend? I like to make sure I'm ready for any occasion. Alexis laughed softly. With the amount of luggage she'd brought, she had to be ready for all 4 seasons. They dragged the suitcases out to the car and hopped in. Make sure to buckle up. The forecast is calling for snow. Why did I think of New Mexico as dry heat all year round? Dr. Lachele asked. No clue. We have snow in the winter. It is hot and dry in the summer, though. Well, I was right about your summers then. Dr. Lachele climbed into the front seat of the Jeep Grand Cherokee. You couldn't get it in purple? She asked, patting the dashboard. Alexis shook her head. Nope. They had this really pretty turquoise, but the car I wanted didn't come in the color. I was so disappointed. I went with this red, because it was the prettiest available in this model. I can understand that. The color of a car says so much about its owner. Dr. Lachele was looking all around her. The mountains are pretty. I think that's what drew me to this area, even more than a top-notch counseling program. I love the mountains so much. As they drove, they caught up on the years they'd been apart. So, tell me about your practice, Dr. Lachele said. Is it everything you thought it would be? Alexis shrugged, carefully navigating the busy roads of Albuquerque. It's good. I mean, I love what I do, but sometimes my clients are exhausting. Helping people try to navigate life isn't exactly what I expected when I went into counseling. Oh, I understand that. Dr. Lachele shook her head. I was a counselor for a whole lot of years before I realized it wasn't what I'd expected it to be. Yeah, I guess I pictured myself talking people through major crises and teaching them how to cope with big stuff. I have one client who is upset because her favorite brand of underwear isn't made anymore, and she can't find any she likes as much. Ah. A Fruit Loop. I have lots of those. If you get tired of driving, pull over. You know how much I love to drive as long as it's not in Manhattan traffic. Alexis nodded. I'll probably pull over halfway there. She vaguely remembered some horror stories about Dr. Lachele's driving when she'd worked for the woman, but she was sure most had to be exaggerated. Who really backed into 6 mailboxes in 1 week? Was that even physically possible? Oh, good. I'm looking forward to it. At their halfway point, Alexis pulled over as promised and they switched spots in the vehicle. Be careful, she said as Dr. Lachele pulled out of the rest area and onto the highway. I'm always careful, Dr. Lachele said as she narrowly missed a semi. Where did that truck come from? She looked genuinely confused, and Alexis started praying. Alexis found that using her brake and the handle above her seat made the trip a bit more comfortable, but closing her eyes was truly the best solution. I can't wait for you to meet the girls. We've been friends since our freshman year in college, and each of us settled in a different Four Corners state. We still meet up at least once a month for lunch. Sometimes we'll spend a whole weekend. It's good to keep in touch with old friends that way. I think you see how much you grow through their eyes. Alexis just nodded and held on tightly. Prayers. It was going to take a lot of prayers to arrive in Farmington alive. Dirk Blanton sat at his computer, wishing life was different. He'd spent the last 15 years working constantly to become a business professor. He'd somehow expected the perfect woman to fall into his lap right around the time he turned 30, and then they would marry and have 2.3 children. Perfect children at that. How on earth had he turned 32 without said perfect woman falling into his life? A colleague had mentioned helping market for a woman who matched people at the altar, and he'd laughed at the concept. Well, he'd laughed at it 3 years ago. But now it sounded awfully appealing. There had to be a better way to meet women, but so far, he hadn't figured it out. He wasn't into the bar scene, and that's where everyone else seemed to meet their potential spouses. A quick search found the name of the woman's company. Matrimony. He thought it was a clever name for what she was doing. Perhaps it was a good idea to give her a call. He'd need to find someone who could move to him, though. He couldn't leave his business for anything. Besides, Albuquerque was home. He wasn't about to relocate for a woman he'd never met. He picked up his phone and dialed the number on his computer screen. When there was no answer, he left a message stating his purpose clearly and succinctly. Hopefully she'd call him by Monday afternoon, and the ball would be rolling. After that unpleasant task had been taken care of, he went back to his research. What was there in life besides work and being ready to provide for a family? He wasn't sure, but he was content with working for now. The family would come. When Dr. Lachele finally turned into the parking lot of the Marriott, Alexis slumped back in her seat. I'll go check in. I'll just sit here and fiddle with the radio, Dr. Lachele replied. Alexis was so happy to be alive and at their destination, she just couldn't express it. She had been certain Dr. Lachele would kill her at least 6 different times. The woman was a menace and didn't belong behind a steering wheel. Ever. She quickly checked in, they parked, and found their room. The others should be here by now. We're supposed to do supper together. Are you hungry? Alexis asked, better able to speak now that she was no longer in a moving vehicle with a crazy woman behind the wheel. Starving. As soon as they were settled, Alexis called Sydney. Are you here yet? We're all sitting here together waiting for you and the good doctor. We're right outside the restaurant. Do you want me to get a table here? Or should we go somewhere? Here. We're both starving half to death. Get a table and we'll be there in 5. Alexis felt her heart beat a little faster. The ball was in motion, and her life was about to change. For the better. Sounds good. See you in a few. We're going to eat in the restaurant here, Alexis told Lachele. The others are getting a table now. Good. We'll eat faster that way. Chapter 2. The weekend went beautifully. All 4 girls took their turns talking to Dr. Lachele, and they all made their needs known about what they were looking for in a husband. When it was time to return the older woman to the airport, Alexis had a tear in her eye, and it wasn't because Dr. Lachele had almost killed them 8 times in the airport parking lot. As Alexis left her there, she couldn't stop thinking about how much her life was about to change. She prayed Dr. Lachele would find someone for her soon. She was tired of being alone. It was late February when Lachele got back in touch with Alexis. I've set the wedding for the first Saturday in April. Do you have a church? Or should I just pick a place? I have a church if it's open on that short of notice. Alexis gave Dr. Lachele the details. Will you be coming for the wedding? You know I wouldn't miss it for all the Coco and Russell Stovers. All right, give me the details, and I will be there. I'll be the girl in white. As soon as she'd hung up, Alexis felt a moment of panic that she immediately squashed. Dr. Lachele was a professional, and she knew what she was doing. Alexis was going to marry that man that she'd always dreamed about. She just knew it. Within moments, she was on the phone with her 3 closest friends. They had all picked out matching bridesmaid dresses, but in different colors, and their own style of wedding dresses. There wasn't much to do but pick a cake and show up. And Alexis had already chosen the cake. On the day of her wedding, Alexis arrived to the church early, as was her habit. Her 3 friends all drifted in one at a time during the next hour. They spent time getting ready together, and Joanna did Alexis's for her. Joanna had grown up on the streets of the Bronx, and she was the biggest tomboy of the bunch. She decided to work on Alexis's hair because, it takes a miracle worker to make me look like a girl, so give me a beautiful canvas like Alexis, and I can make the angels sing. Alexis had laughed, but agreed to let her do it. She was usually the one who would help the others with their hair and makeup, and she remembered teaching Joanna how to do more than just stick her hair into a ponytail. Ponytails are fine for basketball courts, but not so much for hitting on guys. As they got ready, the 4 of them reminisced over their years of friendship. They'd all been together for 8 years, and had lived in close quarters for 4 of them. When Joanna finished her makeup, Alexis took a deep breath and looked into the mirror. She was going to be married in just an hour. Was she ready for that big of a life change? Someone needs to go and see if they can sneak a peek at the groom. Are you kidding? Sydney asked. We're not supposed to see our grooms until we're walking down the aisle. Get a picture if you can. Alexis told Tess as her friend snuck out of the room. Tess just grinned as she closed the door behind her. She hadn't been gone for 2 minutes when Dr. Lachele came back into the room, her arm around Tess's shoulders. Really, Alexis? You send this one to sneak and get pictures of your groom and think I won't notice? You know you'd do the same thing in my shoes, Alexis said, not even a little ashamed. Dr. Lachele laughed softly. Maybe I would. But I wouldn't be nearly so obvious about it. She walked over and sat down next to Alexis. You know my rules for these things. You're going to see him as you're walking down the aisle toward him, and everything in your life is going to fall into place. You're going to love him. I promise. But will I love him right away? That may take a little while. Dr. Lachele got back to her feet. Now let me go talk to the groom. I sure hope he's not working while he waits for the ceremony to start. He wouldn't, would he? Alexis asked as Dr. Lachele left the room. She really hoped her old boss was joking. Dirk paced back and forth in the room. He'd been told to wait until the wedding started. What had he been thinking, to let a crazy woman with purple hair choose the woman he should marry? And why was he standing there waiting for the wedding to start instead of running in the other direction? The door opened and Dr. Lachele slipped in. There's no reason to panic, Dr. Blanton. I wish I could show you all the research that went into your match, but it's confidential. Of course it is. He shook his head. I can't believe how nervous I am. I'm about to marry a total stranger. He must have absolutely lost his mind. What if she had green hair and was covered in piercings and tattoos? Yes, you are, but she's a stranger who has gone through the same extensive testing you went through. She's the perfect wife for you. I promise. I hope so. I really do. Looks didn't matter to him so much as strength of character. He was on a fast track at the university, and he didn't want some crazy wife running around like a mad woman and ruining his reputation. Dr. Lachele patted his hand. You'll see that I did the right thing for you soon enough. I'm not sure if you're planning a honeymoon, since we planned the wedding for spring break week, but your bride has taken the week off work. That will be good. I'm not planning anything big, but it will be good to settle into a home we share. Are you planning on keeping your place? Dr. Lachele asked. She hadn't seen his home, but she could only assume it wouldn't be big enough for two. I am. I bought a home here as soon as I got my position on the faculty at the university. I thought it would be a good starter home for my wife and me when I finally married. I should have known you'd be thinking ahead and planning for your future. All right. It's about time for you to head to the front of the church. I'll go nudge your bride along. Dirk took a deep breath and nodded. This was it. He was about to be married. Alexis watched as her three closest friends walked to the front of the church, all in matching dresses of different colors. Her own dress was mint green, and matched the others, but she wouldn't wear her dress that matched theirs until their wedding days. They'd thought it most prudent to just buy 4 matching dresses in different colors and wear them as each of their wedding days came. The wedding dress she wore was pure white and sleeveless. She felt very pretty in it, and she only hoped that her new husband would think she was pretty as well. As her maid of honor, Sydney was the last person to walk down the aisle before her. Her parents hadn't been able to make it to the wedding on such short notice, and she wished they were there. When Dr. Lachele's husband, Sam, tapped her on the shoulder, she grinned at him. I hope you're offering to walk me down the aisle, Sam, because I don't think I could get to the front of the church on my own 2 feet. Sam nodded, offering her his arm. I haven't seen a more beautiful bride since the day I married Lachele. Knowing he only meant it as a compliment, Alexis smiled. Thank you. Then Lachele was there, waving them forward, and Alexis took a deep breath, walking along to the beat of the music. As soon as they were inside the church, her eyes went to her groom, standing straight and alone at the front of the church. Their wedding party was definitely lopsided, she thought. The man standing there at the altar had dark hair and eyes. His nose was perfectly straight. In fact, everything about him seemed to be perfect. Could she live up to such perfection? Hopefully his personality didn't match his looks, because if it did, she'd be way out of her league. For a moment she considered turning tail and running, but she didn't. Instead she continued walking, and when she got to the front of the church, she took the man's hand. Standing together, they faced the pastor, but she couldn't help sneaking more than a few peeks at him. He stood looking straight forward, and his face had a look of gravity. She couldn't help but wonder if the man ever laughed, but maybe that's why she'd been chosen for him. She found humor in the smallest things, and she could help him be just a bit less rigid. After their vows, the pastor said, "You may now kiss your bride." She turned completely to him and stepped closer, wrapping her arms around his neck. She pressed her lips to his ear and whispered, "Give me all you've got, cowboy." She hoped it would remove the stick from his spine and get him to laugh. He looked at her with surprise in his eyes. "I'm a professor, not a cowboy." She sighed, pulling his head down for their kiss. As soon as his lips touched hers, her heart sped up. For all his seemingly boring attitude, the man could kiss. She pulled away and looked at him with astonishment for a moment, and then she pulled his head back down for another kiss. She could hear the laughter of her friends behind her, and she just didn't care. Alexis was going to spend the rest of her life with this man, and she was going to enjoy their first kiss together, whether they were alone or in front of an entire congregation of people. When he lifted his head, his eyes looked glazed to her, and she smiled. She'd done her job well. As they turned to face the congregation, she linked her arm through his and smiled. They walked back down the aisle to the back of the church, and she didn't let him quit walking until they were in the bride's room, where she shut the door. "I'm Alexis." He was still too overwhelmed by her boldness to be able to think coherently. "Dirk." "It's nice to meet you, Dirk." "It was nice kissing you too. We're going to have to try that again. Soon." She winked at him. "What do you do?" "I already told you. I'm a college professor." "Oh? You weren't kidding about that?" Alexis studied him. "You seem too young to be a professor." "Well, I'm not. What do you do?" She seemed a little too bold to him, and he wondered if she acted this way with everyone. Did the woman have no modesty? "I'm a life coach." I have a master's in counseling. He nodded. I have a doctorate in marketing. You can get a doctorate in marketing? She blinked at him. She'd never even heard of such a thing. Apparently you can, because I have one. Do you work at the university here in town? She'd specified with Dr. Lachele that she wanted a man who could either relocate or already worked in Albuquerque. I do. And you work here in town? She nodded. I do. I have an office in Eubank Medical Plaza. And do you have a house here? He hoped not, because he'd chosen his house to be a good one for a professor who was up and coming. Hopefully if she did own a house, she'd happily leave it to move in with him. I have an apartment. Well, I guess you're moving in with me then, because I have a house. In Vineyard Estates. Alexis recognized the name of the neighborhood as one of the swankiest in Albuquerque. I guess I'll move then. Are you planning a honeymoon? I took the week off. Not a honeymoon. It didn't seem practical right now. We'll have a week to get you moved into my house, though. She tilted her head to one side and studied him. Do you ever do anything that's impractical? Most people she wouldn't dare ask that. She was all about teaching people to be practical. But with him? Someone might need to teach him to be impractical. Dirk shook his head. Of course not. What would be the logic in that? For fun? I have enough fun. I'm conducting a research project that's just fascinating. I'll have to tell you about it later. I can't wait. She hoped he wouldn't recognize her words for the sarcasm they were, but he didn't seem to. What do you like to do other than work? He shrugged. I like to work. I'm fascinated by my studies. I'd rather not have to do the teaching part of my job, but I make that work too. Do you like to play games? Like board games? Or role-playing games? Any games. Anything for fun. Do you like to sing karaoke? Dirk made a face. Not usually. I remember playing a lot of games as a child, but I'm an adult now. Alexis shrugged. There are a ton of adult games. As sexy and nice as she found the man, having a conversation with him was almost painful. There had to be a way to connect, though. They were married, and she didn't believe in divorce. She took a step closer to him and was surprised at the look he gave her. He seemed almost wary. Wrapping her arms around him, she kissed him again, hoping that she'd not remembered his kisses wrong. Kissing was something they would be doing a lot of together, and she wanted to like it as much as she had liked it before. As soon as their lips touched, she knew she hadn't remembered incorrectly. His kisses set her entire world on fire. He was something else. What, she wasn't sure yet, but definitely something else. When they rejoined the reception a short while later, her hair was a bit mussed, and she definitely looked as if she'd been kissed. After the reception, he followed her to her apartment, and she hurried and changed into regular clothes while he sat in her living room, and she felt as if he was judging every aspect of her being from her taste in books to her taste in furnishings. She'd packed her bedroom and kitchen, knowing she could work in the rest of the small apartment when she had time around work. She would get it done this week, she hoped. The back of her Jeep was even piled high with boxes, ready to move to wherever she was headed. When she joined him in the living room, she was wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, emblazoned with the local university's motto. Did you go to school here? Just for grad school. I did my undergrad in New York. Really? Where in New York? I did my undergrad in New York as well. Maybe they finally had something in common. Binghamton. Me too. He smiled at her, and it was the first genuine emotion she'd seen on his face, other than confusion, which seemed to be constant around her. I loved the nature preserve. I'd study there whenever the weather was good. Which wasn't often. The flooding there was really scary. It was. She shook her head. I had just started school there during the really big flood in 2011. I graduated the year before that. So it doesn't look like we crossed paths at school at all. Where did you do your graduate and doctoral work? He seemed to like talking schools, and she could do that. They had to find common ground somewhere other than kissing. Graduate was University of Texas. Doctoral was UCLA. So, you've been all over. Did you grow up in New York? He nodded. I grew up in Vestal, which is why I ended up going to Binghamton. I grew up in Manhattan. I interned for Dr. Lachele while I was in college. Really? I cannot imagine having to work for her. Exactly how long has her hair been purple, and does she really have a doctorate in psychology? It was hard to believe an educated woman would choose such an odd color for her hair. Alexis laughed. Her hair has been purple for years. And yes, she really does. I saw the diploma on her wall. Interesting. Do you know if her success rate on these marriages is really as good as she claims? It is. When I worked for her, she hadn't had a single couple, out of about 15 at that time, that hadn't worked out. From what I hear, she still got that same rate of success. Dirk shrugged. I have to admit I'm surprised, but pleased. You wouldn't have been someone I would have immediately been attracted to, but I'm enjoying getting to know you. Really? She asked. She had always been referred to as pretty, and though he had a sexy nerd vibe going, she wouldn't have thought he had women pounding his door down. You're much too, well, vibrant is the word that comes to mind. You seem like you are interested in taking the world by storm. Aren't we all? I keep telling people that I'm going to rule the world someday. He smiled slightly. Unless you have the makings of the next Microsoft, I wouldn't count on that, not yet. I'll come up with something, though. She winked at him, grabbing her overnight bag. I have a car full of boxes already. Why don't we head to your place? We can do more moving tomorrow or Monday, but I shouldn't have to move too much on my wedding day. Why don't you let me hire some movers to get your things shuttled to my place? I don't like the idea of you lifting all those boxes yourself. I'm little but I pack a punch. She flexed her muscle for him, and he shook his head, hoping she didn't often do that in public. Tough crowd, she mumbled under her breath as she led him out of the apartment. Chapter 3. Alexis followed Dirk to his house and parked directly behind him in his driveway. His car, his house, his clothes, everything about him screamed what he did for a living. Once she was parked, he walked to the back of her car and helped her carry everything inside. His house was absolutely immaculate, and she was suddenly embarrassed about her apartment. It hadn't been dirty, but it wasn't perfect. His house was so clean it was almost obnoxious. Has your house always been this clean? She asked, looking around. Of course. I have a housekeeper that comes in for 2 hours every day. She cleans and fixes my supper. My house always looks this way. Alexis shrugged. Having a housekeeper for 2 hours a day would make her life easier. She just hoped she did laundry during those 2 hours. There are worse ways to live. He frowned at her. I'm sure there are. She looked at the suitcase in her hand. Where do you want me to put this? He led her to a large bedroom that was obviously decorated in a masculine style. Maybe he intended for them to share a room after all. Here would be good. I had considered offering you time to get to know me before we consummate the relationship, but you seem too aggressive to need that time. She shook her head with a laugh. I wouldn't call me aggressive. I just wanted to know what it was like to kiss my husband. She stepped toward him. And I have to say, I like it. He leaned down and brushed her lips with his. Like that? She nodded, wrapping her arms around his neck and kissing him again. They might not be communicating well in conversation, but they could sure communicate with kisses well. She hoped that stretched to the rest of their private life together. His hand splayed across her back, and he deepened the kiss. He felt like maybe she was interested in more. Now? During daylight hours? What did he care? She was beautiful and his wife. Dirk surreptitiously walked her toward the bed and pushed her down onto it, covering her with his body. He was going to make the most of their marriage. Alexis lay on her back a little stunned by the way Dirk had made her feel. All of his uptight just disappeared when they were naked and writhing on a bed together. She sighed, looking over at him. He looked more handsome than ever, lying on his back with one arm flung over his eyes. She rolled to his side and put her head on his shoulder, wanting to be close to him after the intimacy they'd just shared. He looked at her with surprise. "Are you okay?" Alexis nodded. "More than okay. I feel closer to you than I've ever felt to anyone." He wasn't sure how to respond to that, so he just stayed quiet. He'd enjoyed the sex, of course, but how long should he lay there being a pillow for her before it was all right to get up? They needed to finish bringing in boxes and get her stuff put away. He hated lying around when there was work to do. After a few more minutes of silence, Alexis sat up. "I'm going to get a shower, and then I'll start putting stuff away." She pulled the cover from the bed and carried it into the bathroom. He frowned after her. Making the bed was going to be a lot more work now that she'd completely torn it apart. Hopefully she planned on doing it herself. His housekeeper didn't work on the weekends. By the time she came out of the bathroom, he was dressed in a pair of slacks and a polo. For him, that was dressing down. He nodded to her when she came out of the bathroom wearing just a towel. "I'm going to bring in the rest of your things from the back of your Jeep." She nodded, watching him leave. The man was an odd duck. She'd never been intimate with a man before, but she would have expected her towel-clad body to be a little more interesting to him than it had been. She noticed that he had emptied several drawers for her, and she filled those with clothes and hung things in the half of the closet he'd cleared out. Alexis had never lived in such a fancy place, and it felt strange to realize it would be her home. Dirk carried several boxes into the house, always heading right back out for more. He didn't seem to have much to say, and she wondered what he was thinking about. Did he regret that they'd consummated the marriage so quickly? They worked together in silence for a few hours, finding places for her things. Finally, he rubbed the back of his neck. "Are you getting hungry?" "I'm afraid I don't cook. I usually order takeout or go out on the weekends." She shrugged. "I can see if I can throw something together, or we can go out. I don't mind either way." He frowned for a moment. "Well, I'm told women don't like to cook on their wedding days, so let's go out somewhere." "What do you like to eat?" "I love steak. Any good steak place just thrills me." Her answer made him look a little green around the gills. "You eat meat?" "You don't?" Who didn't eat meat? Wasn't it usually women who were vegetarians? He frowned. "No, I've been a vegetarian since high school." "Why?" "For health reasons. My father died of heart disease when I was in high school, and did you know that being a vegetarian is one of the best ways to prevent and even reverse heart disease?" "No. It also significantly reduces the risks of cancer." "Don't you miss steak and bacon?" She couldn't imagine not eating meat. "Not particularly. I haven't eaten either one in 14 years. "I'll eat your share." "Don't you worry." "Does that mean you don't plan on raising our children vegetarian?" "Are you kidding me? I'm planning on raising my kids with a slice of bacon in one hand and a salami stick in the other." What was wrong with this man? Surely Dr. Lachele had made a mistake. "So where will we eat?" he asked. "Where can we both eat?" "Pizza, I guess, but I will be getting meat lovers." He frowned. "You're exasperating." "So are you." She frowned. "Why don't we go somewhere with a good steak and a good salad bar?" "That would work, I guess." He shook his head. "We could also do a Mongolian grill-type place. They usually have tofu options." "I think I just threw up a little bit in my mouth. Do you think Dr. Lachele mixed up our paperwork?" he asked softly. "I sure hope not. I guess I thought so, and then I remembered this." She stepped up to him and stood on tiptoe to kiss him. His arms automatically wrapped around her, and he kissed her deeply. When he finally raised his head, her eyes were glazed over. "I guess you have a point." She sighed. "So do you." He blushed. "Back to where we're going to eat." Alexei thought for a moment. "How about the cooperage? Do they have a good salad bar?" "I don't eat salad, but I'm told it's exceptional." "I love their prime rib." Dirk shrugged. Alright, let's try it. He grabbed his wallet and keys. You're going to have to move your car. I don't mind driving. He frowned. I drive. She groaned. Are you one of those men who is too macho to let your wife drive you anywhere? This man was going to be the death of her, and they'd only been married a few hours. He said nothing, just led her out to the car, and waited while she moved her vehicle. She got into his car, and looked around. It was a classy car, and the seats were leather. The navigation system greeted him by name. Nice car. Dirk nodded. I'm quite fond of it. He'd carefully researched which car to buy, polling his colleagues. He wanted a car that would fit in, not one that would be deemed strange for a professor. In other words, no woman will ever get behind the wheel of it? He shrugged, but said nothing. Is your mother still alive? Do you have siblings? I am an only child. My mother died of cancer while I was in college. Alexis frowned. I guess I understand why you're a vegetarian now. And why our children will be? Dirk asked, not meeting her eyes. Ugh, I have a feeling there are some things we'll never see eye to eye on. But I think our conversations will always be lively. I'm certain they will. When they ordered their meals, Alexis asked for her prime rib rare. She could see on his face, the mere idea of a rare steak turned his stomach, but she didn't back down. She was going to eat her food just how she liked it. After the waitress left, he shook his head at her. Do you always eat your beef still mooing? There's no other way to eat it, she said, taking a sip of her soft drink. You know carbonation isn't good for you, don't you? You know it's not good to complain to the woman you sleep with about her eating and drinking habits, don't you? He had a right to say something about how she ate once she was pregnant. Maybe. For now, he could keep his opinions to himself. Did you just threaten me? He asked, absolutely shocked, and more than a little amused. Take it how you will. She blew him a kiss, and his eyes locked onto her lips. All of a sudden, I don't care how you eat your beef. Just brush your teeth when you're done. She grinned at him. I think we're going to be fine. The jury's still out on that. Dirk couldn't believe this was the kind of woman Dr. Lachele thought was right for him. His perfect match. It was a good thing for her he'd signed a contract stating they'd spend at least a year together, or he probably wouldn't last a week. She reached out and squeezed his knee under the table, and suddenly he could no longer think. He saw red. There was something about this woman that touched him in a way no other ever had. And he wasn't talking about the hand on his knee. Though he liked her hand there, more than he should admit. After their meal, he drove them toward the mountains instead of straight back to the house. Where are we going? She asked. Since I didn't think a honeymoon was advisable at this time, I thought our wedding night could include a drive up into the mountains. There's still snow on them, and it might be nice to just sit in the car and look out at the beauty that is our city. Wow. Look who's being a romantic. He frowned. If you don't want to take the drive, I can turn around and go right back to the house. No, I want to spend some time with you. Can we make out in the car? Why would we make out in a car when we have a perfectly good bed at home? Because we're being all romantic, and we can. Why is kissing in a car more romantic than making love in our bed with no interruptions? She shrugged. I don't know. I guess I just want to take the drive, but I want to kiss you too. So, we can kiss in the car, or wait forever to kiss, and who wants to wait forever? Are you always going to be this, Randy? He couldn't think of a less offensive term for how she was acting. She laughed. I think that term is supposed to refer to men, not women. Well, it seems to apply to you well. I don't know how I'll be later, but I am extremely attracted to you. When you're not talking. Well, that's probably good. He wasn't sure they had anything in common other than sexual compatibility. He had to be pleased for that, though. When they reached the turnout in the mountains, he'd been thinking about, he pulled into it and turned off the headlights. We'll be able to see the stars better from here than we ever could from the city. There's so much smog there, she nodded, reaching out and linking her fingers with his. It's beautiful. I love to come up here. Do you hike? He tried not to get his hopes up that they had any recreational activity in common. She was definitely not what he was expecting in a wife. I do. It's actually one of my favorite things. I don't like to ski, because I get my skis all tangled together and fall a lot, but hiking is amazing. He turned to her, excited. I love to hike. We should go hiking together. He couldn't believe how excited he was to have something in common with his new wife. She grinned, feeling excited to have something fun to do with him. I'd love that. Do you want to go one day this week? Let's get you moved first and see what time we have left, but I love the idea. We could bring lunches and hike all day. Wonderful. She leaned toward him and pulled him toward her for a kiss. What was that for? Alexis shrugged. I told you I wanted to kiss you. I'm not fooling around in a car. If you're feeling all frisky, let's drive back to the house. She laughed. Frisky? Has that word been used since the 50s? I don't know. I heard it on old reruns of Happy Days. You mean a 50s show? Dirk sighed. Are you always going to make fun of my speech? Probably. If it's worth making fun of. Do you tease everyone? If I'm not teasing you, then I probably don't like you at all. And you know I like you. You felt me liking you. Her hand caressed his shoulder, and he groaned. No more romance for you. I'm driving back to the house. And you'll romance me there? He sighed. I have a feeling there will be no romance involved, but I'll definitely be feeling you. She laughed. I think I'm starting to like you, Dirk. Good. A wife should always like, love, and respect her husband. I'll do my best. Are you going to be likable, lovable, and respectable? Always. She wasn't so sure about that, but she didn't dare argue with him. The man was more than a little crazy already. By Friday afternoon, they had everything of hers moved into the house, and she felt comfortable with how it had gone. During their week together, they'd spent more time in bed than out of it, but that was all right with her. Out of it, she could only see their differences. In bed, she liked their differences. The housekeeper was sweet, but she was very used to doing only what Dirk wanted. The first night she cooked dinner for them, Alexis couldn't even begin to eat it. It was all tofu. Disgusting. After that, Alexis started to cook her own meals, feeling silly that she and her husband couldn't even eat the same thing. Do you want to go hiking tomorrow? He asked. She nodded. I would love that. Are we doing a picnic lunch? She could make him a bean sprout sandwich maybe, and she'd have a good old PB&J. He was probably anti-PB&J. That sounds good. How do you feel about PB&J? She refused to assume he'd hate something without asking. Maybe they'd be able to eat that one thing together. He grinned. My favorite sandwich. Seriously? I could make PB&Js and we would both be happy? There had been so few things food-wise they'd seen eye to eye on that she was stunned. Yes. That sounds great. I'll make our picnic lunch then. Anything else I should pack? I have my Camelback. Do you have one? She nodded. I'll fill them up with water, and there's our hydration. I'm really excited to hike with you tomorrow. Well, we don't even have the same taste in television shows, so it will be nice to enjoy doing something together. He grinned. Other than sex, that is. I think we have that down pat. She laughed, walking toward him and wrapping her arms around his neck. I think we could use a little more work on it, don't you? Maybe some more practice until we have it perfect. He laughed, swooping her up into his arms. He didn't look strong enough to carry her, but he was obviously stronger than he looked. I think practice is always a good idea. Alexis grinned. You're a good husband. I try to be. That evening, she read while he watched some documentary on subliminal messages while shopping, mumbling under his breath that they got everything wrong. He was actually taking notes, and she was doing her best not to roll her eyes. Sydney had suggested one of her favorite mail-order bride authors, so Alexis was binge reading while Dirk watched television at night. Sadly enough, she was sure she and Dirk would get along better after they were both working again. She was ready to get back to her clients, though she didn't feel she'd had enough time off. She just wasn't all that comfortable around her new husband, other than the time they spent in bed. She was plenty comfortable with that. When her phone rang, Dirk glared at her, so she took her call in their bedroom. "Hello? Hey, it's Sydney. How's married life?" "Crazy. I'm married to a machine. Except in bed." He seemed a little uptight. "Do you guys have anything at all in common? Watching the two of you has me scared for the match Dr. Lachele is making for me. Trust me, we're well matched in some ways. We're going hiking tomorrow. We both love hiking." Alexis didn't add she was thrilled they'd found something they both enjoyed doing. "Hiking can be fun. I like it. Some weekend we'll drive out to Moab to hike. Could be fun to see you. Just enjoy the honeymoon first." Alexis grinned, glad her friend couldn't see her blush. "Oh, I am. Trust me." Chapter 4. When Alexis woke up Saturday morning, she jumped out of bed. She hated mornings, but on hike days she was always excited. She wasn't what anyone would call athletic, and the only outdoorsy thing she really liked to do was hike, so she was excited to spend the day with Dirk, doing something they both loved. She immediately showered and dressed, going out to find him in the dining room, eating a bowl of oatmeal for breakfast. She rummaged in the fridge until she found the package of bacon she'd stuck there, and she nuked a few pieces while making herself some toast. A bacon sandwich with cheese sounded just right before a day of hiking. She sat down across from him, grinning at him. "I'm excited to hike with you today. I already made our picnic, and it's in the fridge ready to throw into a backpack. I usually wear a backpack over my camelback, so that will be just fine for me. I like to keep a first aid kit on hand." "Sounds good." She could wear one too, but since he offered, she wouldn't refuse him. "Is that what you're wearing to hike?" he asked, eyeing her jeans and short-sleeved shirt. She nodded. "I'll throw on a jacket that I can tie around my waist if I get too hot." "Do you have hiking boots? Is a beach ball round?" "I'd like to be ready to leave within an hour if that sounds good to you." "Absolutely." She smiled. "My best friend, who was also my college roommate, is a ranger at Arches National Park. I'd love to go hike there sometime. We could see her at the same time." "Do you see her often?" She nodded. "4 of us have lunch the 3rd Saturday of every month. I guess that's a week from today. We all drive to the Four Corners and eat there. We each live in one of the Four Corner states." "That's odd, but I suppose it works. It's a very long drive for lunch." "It's a short drive to get to see my 3 favorite people in the world," she countered, taking a big gulp of orange juice. Neither of them was a coffee drinker, which she liked. "Where do you like to hike?" "Copper Trailhead is my favorite spot. I can go long, medium or short, depending on my mood." "And your mood today?" "Let's do long." "I would love that. I haven't been to Copper Trailhead yet, but I've heard amazing things about it." She finished eating, and hurried to throw her trash away, and clean her small mess in the kitchen. "I'm going to grab my camelback and my boots." 10 minutes later, they were out the door, and she could feel her excitement building. Who would have thought something like this would be the one thing they'd found they had in common? When they got to the trail, they put on their packs, and started out. She let him choose the trail, because he knew the area better, and went after him. They'd been hiking for a little over an hour when he stopped at an overlook, pointing to the city. "Right over there is where we live." He pointed out other things, such as the university campus. "This is one of my favorite spots in the whole city." He looked back at her, seeing that her cheeks were flushed from the cold, but she wasn't out of breath. "You really do hike a lot, don't you?" "As much as I can," she told him. "I don't always have time, but I try to go at least once a week." "I'm surprised a meat eater like you can keep up with me. Not eating meat doesn't necessarily mean you're healthier." She shook her head at him. He was very much a typical vegetarian in her mind, shoving his food choices down everyone's throats. Do you lecture your students on vegetarianism? Of course not. I lecture my students on marketing and nothing else. He frowned for a moment. When I said I was surprised you could keep up with me, I meant it as a compliment, not an insult. Thank you, then. I'll try to take it as you meant it. Ready to go some more? He asked. We're about a fourth of the way to the spot I really want to show you. Lead the way. She was glad she'd packed a picnic, because it sounded like he planned an 8-hour hike. It was a good thing she really did like hiking and hadn't made it up. She would be in serious trouble otherwise. They stopped at his spot a few hours later, and she spread out their lunch on a blanket. There aren't a lot of people up here, she said, liking that they were virtually alone. No, most do one of the short or medium hikes, not a lot come this far. He reached for one of the sandwiches she'd packed, and took a bite. Perfect sandwich. So many people get the ratio of peanut butter to jelly all wrong. You did great. Wow. 2 compliments in one day. Be still my heart. He grinned. I'm not that difficult, am I? Alexis considered his question seriously. Sometimes you are. I have a hard time knowing if you're annoyed with me or not. Well, except in bed, and you're never annoyed with me there. Dirk reached out and took her hand. How could I be annoyed with a woman who brings me so much pleasure and does it so enthusiastically? Am I too enthusiastic? She asked. I've never really done it before, so I'm just going on how I feel. I haven't either, so I guess we're doing it right. Feels right to me. He leaned over and kissed her. Don't try to start something now. We feel isolated, but someone could stumble over us at any minute. We have a bed for that, right, Professor? That we do. She grinned, finally feeling like she was starting to understand him. I'll do my very best to keep my grimy hands to myself then. When they had finally finished eating, she packed all of the trash from their lunch away in the backpack he was carrying and pulled him down on the blanket before folding it up. One last kiss? He shook his head. You are a wanton woman, wife. But he kissed her until her toes curled. Until they heard voices. Ah, we're interrupting people making out. Alexis pulled away from Dirk, her face blushing. Hi. Hi. The girl looked college age and excited to be hiking. Dr. Blanton? Dirk sighed. Hello, Desiree. I didn't know you came up here to make out, Professor. I don't usually, but this is the first time I have brought my wife here. Dirk was mortified, but he didn't know what to do but plow forward. It was going to be all over the school that he was making out with women on top of a mountain. Alexis, this is Desiree, one of my students. Desiree, my wife Alexis. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Blanton. She looked at her friend, another fresh-faced young woman. Let's get out of here and let them make out in private. I think I deserve extra credit for this, Professor. Desiree winked at Dirk and hurried away. Dirk groaned. I cannot believe I just got caught making out with my wife by one of my students. Alexis laughed softly. Don't worry, Professor. It might just help your reputation. It will damage my reputation, and we both know it. He got to his feet angrily. I'll be waiting for you over there. He gestured to a lookout point and walked to it. Alexis rolled her eyes as she folded the blanket. You could have told her we'd only been married a week, she said softly. She'd have understood better then. Married a week or 6 years. We have a bed for that. Dirk couldn't believe she wouldn't understand how important his reputation was to him. She refused to let him spoil her fun. This was the first really good day they'd had together. Soon, he'd forget all about running into his student. They started back down the mountain, and she kept silent for the first little bit. I love your trail, she said after what seemed like forever. I'd love to come back. Maybe when you've gotten the whole sex kitten thing out of your system. I can't afford to be caught that way again. Your reputation, she said bitterly. The stick up the man's butt was so big, she wasn't sure how he was able to walk. Yes. Maybe reputation isn't important to you, but I'm up for tenure, and I won't get it if there are rumors floating around about me making out with women on mountains. I see. Instead of arguing with him, she stayed silent. They said almost nothing for the rest of their hike. Once they got to the car, she buckled herself and stared out the window on her side of the car. She didn't even want to look at him. Do you want to go out for supper? He asked. I don't care. And she really didn't. She didn't want to do anything but scream and yell at him, but she knew it would do no good. I'll choose the place then. He couldn't understand what she had to be angry with him about, but it was obvious she was. He was the one who was going to have his reputation ruined because she couldn't keep her hands to herself. He drove to a Mongolian grill he particularly liked for their good vegetarian protein options. Does this place work? She just shrugged, getting out of the car. She liked Mongolian grills, and she'd be sure to put as much meat on her plate as she could to gross him out. She hoped they had shrimp, because he seemed to particularly despise seafood. Walking through the line, she chose mostly meat, knowing it would get his goat. And then she piled potatoes and rice on top of the meat. It was as unhealthy as she could get at a reasonably healthy place to eat. She knew he'd have something to say about it, and she just wanted him to. She wanted to have a reason to glare at him and maybe kick him under the table. He looked at her plate but bit his tongue, realizing she was furious with him. Poking an angry bear just didn't make sense. Her hand was shaking as she held her fork. He offered her chopsticks, and the look she gave him told him that he was going to draw back a bloody stump if he wasn't careful. The woman really did have a temper. She drank 4 Cokes with her meal, not even wanting them. She wanted water to drink, but that would make him happy. No, she'd drink Cokes until she vomited. Ugh. The man was way too obsessed with his reputation and position in life. If he were a client of hers, she'd tell him to get a grip. Once they were home, she went straight to the bedroom and showered, changing into her favorite pair of pajamas. She hadn't worn pajamas since they'd gotten married, because really there was no point. He was just going to take them off her anyway. Not tonight, though. She was going to wear them all night, and if he tried to touch her, she'd suggest he sleep on the couch. Of course, he had 2 perfectly good spare bedrooms, but she didn't care. As long as he left her alone. Instead of joining him in the living room like she usually did, she sat in bed reading her book. It was her new favorite of the mail-order brides, and she wanted to finish it before bed. Dirk sat alone in the living room watching documentaries on television. It was the first night since they'd married that Alexis hadn't joined him, and he found that he missed her. He liked being able to look up while he was working and see her push her hair back over her shoulder, or turn the page on her Kindle. He considered going into their bedroom to talk to her, but he didn't think she'd welcome anything from him but an apology, and he hadn't done anything wrong. If she thought he had, that was her problem, not his. When he went to bed, she was on her side of the bed with her back turned toward the middle. He could tell she wasn't sleeping, but when he put his hand on her back, she shrugged him off. She was obviously too annoyed to even talk, let alone make love. Well, that was just fine with him. He wasn't the one running around trying to get into her pants all the time. He lay on his back and stared up at the ceiling. If she wanted to be a brat about everything, then she could do just that. He couldn't imagine how someone so immature could possibly be a life counselor. When Dirk tried to talk to Alexis the following day, he was met with icy silence. She had no desire to talk to him. After breakfast, she put her dishes in the dishwasher, ignoring his. I'm going to run to the grocery store. I'll be back when I'm back. I need more oatmeal. Then I guess you can go to the grocery store, she said, slamming the door after her. When she got into the car, she rested her head against the steering wheel. Yes, she was angry, but she didn't have to be childish about it. She'd get his oatmeal. She already knew his favorite brand. As she walked through the store, she bumped into the girl from the mountain the day before. Desiree grinned at her. Small world, isn't it? Alexis nodded. Sure is. She took a deep breath. Dr. Blanton is going to be mortified if you tell anyone what you saw yesterday. We've only been married a week, and, well, I started things. He didn't. Desiree nodded. I wouldn't tell anyone. It was just funny to see him blush like that. He always seems so in control, if that makes sense. Oh, it makes perfect sense. He's not the kind of man to let anyone see him with his defenses down. He's a great teacher, though. I have learned so much in his class. Maybe I'll stay after class tomorrow and ask him for extra credit to keep my mouth shut. Alexis laughed. I wouldn't. He's still pretty upset about the whole thing. Well, he shouldn't be. What's wrong with being human? You're beautiful, and you've only been married a week. I'm surprised he let you out of the bedroom long enough to get caught kissing on a mountain. Good point. Raising her hand in a wave, Alexis moved on to the next aisle. Even his students noticed how uptight he was. Maybe Dirk needed to lighten up, but she wasn't sure she could be the one to help him do it. She got everything she needed to make taco salad for supper. They could each put their meals together, and she could have tons of meat and no lettuce or tomatoes, and he could have, well, he could have the boring stuff. It was time she stopped acting childish and started acting like the professional she was. She knew she would never allow a client to keep acting like a child, and here she was doing it. When she got home, she held up the oatmeal so he could see that she'd gotten it, and he smiled. He'd obviously taken the peace offering exactly as she'd meant it. I'm going to make taco salad for supper. I figure we can both put whatever we want on the salad, so we'll both be happy. What will you put on yours? Beans, meat, and cheese, of course. I hope you got lettuce, tomatoes, and guacamole for me. Yup. You get all the gross stuff, and I'll eat the good stuff. She walked into the kitchen and put the groceries away. She was just putting the last of the perishables away when he came into the kitchen. Are we all right? He asked softly. She nodded. I'd rather not be yelled at again, but I forgive you, and we'll move on. She'd forgive him? Whatever. He wasn't going to argue with her. Good. I missed talking to you. She laughed. That's all you missed? He grinned. Well, there was something else I missed a lot, too. With those words, he swung her up into his arms and carried her to their bedroom, laying her gently on the bed. I really like being married to you. You like the sex. You haven't figured out if you like me yet. The grin on her face told him she didn't mind. You like the sex, too. He quickly stripped and got onto the bed with her. I noticed. Well, praise God that your eyes were open for long enough for you to notice that I was enjoying myself, too. You wouldn't be constantly starting things if you didn't like it. He looked down into her eyes. Let's not fight like that again. When you're angry with me, we'll talk it out. I tried that, and you wouldn't let me. I needed time to cool off, but by the time I was cooled off, you were too angry to talk. I guess my anger is slower to boil, but once it gets there it stays. Yours is quick boil, but it's over fast. We'll have to remember that about each other. Yes, we will. But for now, he leaned down and kissed her, doing everything he could to make up for their previous night. Chapter 5. Dirk was already awake when Alexis got up on Monday morning. She realized they'd never discussed their weekday schedules, because this was the first workday since their marriage. What time is your first class? 7. I like early classes. Do your students stay awake? She asked with a yawn. She hadn't been able to take any classes at 8 during her college career. She'd always ended up dropping them after missing the first half of them. They do. I'm a very interesting teacher. She studied him warily, not really believing him after talking to Desiree. All right, you should come sit in on one of my classes and see. I have to work, she said with a yawn. What time do you have to be there? He asked. Not till 9, but I need that long to wake up. I'm not a morning person. She sat down with him, her orange juice and bacon sandwich in front of her. How late will you work? I am usually done by 3. I don't have a super long work day. I do host a group in my office on Thursday nights. He studied her. It was hard to think of her in a professional capacity after the week they'd shared together. What kind of group? It's a self-esteem group. It's all about seeing yourself as stronger and more than you currently do. It's my favorite group to have. I've been doing different self-esteem groups since my graduate school days. Does anyone ever build up so much self-esteem they quit coming? She laughed softly. I'm afraid the people with self-esteem issues tend to always have them. They get better, but a lot of times they'll backslide, and they'll come back. Maybe I'll come and be part of your self-esteem group. She frowned at him. You have self-esteem problems? Not particularly. Then why would you come to the group? Dirk shrugged. I guess I want to see you in your professional environment. It seems so different than the you I know. Well, maybe sometime soon. I would need to get my group ready for someone they don't know. That makes sense. He got to his feet, walking around the table and kissing her softly. I'll see you this evening. She nodded, watching him leave. Her entire world had changed in the space of a week. Now they just had to see if they could still be happy when they weren't together all the time. Alexis was happy to be back in her office. Her assistant, Debbie, had worked the week before, simply taking phone calls and catching up on paperwork. How many appointments do I have today? Alexis asked as she picked up the mail from Debbie's desk. 6. I had to make one for 3 so I could squeeze everyone in. That's fine. You know I'll stay late if there's a reason to. Alexis picked up her phone to text Dirk that she'd be later than she'd told him, but she realized she didn't have his phone number. She was married to a man and didn't know how to get in touch with him. I just realized that I told my husband I'd be leaving at 3. If he calls, let him know what time I'm out of here. Why wouldn't he call your cell? He's very considerate. He won't want to interrupt a session with a client. Alexis liked Debbie a lot, but she didn't think anyone should know she didn't have her new husband's phone number. How weird did that make her? I'll let him know then. For lunch that day, she and Debbie had steak. Debbie went to pick it up just before lunch. Would you believe Dirk, my new husband, is a vegetarian? I've never met a man who is a vegetarian. Usually that's women. A vegetarian? Really? You are the most carnivorous woman I've ever met. That's got to be interesting. Debbie grinned at her, eating a bite of her baked potato. It really is. I'm not sure if I should hide my meat eating from him or wave it under his nose. At first, I wasn't sure if he was going to let me put meat in the fridge, but we seem to have gotten past the initial awkwardness. What's he like? Debbie asked. I mean, I was at the wedding, so I know what he looks like, but what's his personality like? What does he do? He's a professor with a doctorate in marketing. Who gets a doctorate in marketing? Alexis shrugged. He really seems like a good man, but he's overly concerned about his reputation. One of his students caught us kissing on a hiking trail, and I thought he was going to lose his mind. Debbie laughed. Kissing on a hiking trail doesn't sound that bad. Well, we might have been lying on a picnic blanket kissing. That sounds more like something a man obsessed with his reputation would get upset about. How was the picnic? Did you two have something you could both eat, or did you each have to have a different meal? PB&J was a win for both of us. I'm impressed. Good job finding a happy medium. I worked hard at it. Alexis ate the last bite of her steak, looking at all the blood on her plate. She grinned. It was a good thing Dirk wasn't there. He hated to see blood on her plate. Maybe she'd limit her steak eating to lunchtime when he wasn't around. I'm getting back to it. Do you mind handling the dishes? Not at all. I'm just glad we had a few minutes to eat together and catch up. Me too. It's been a very crazy week. When we get a chance, I want you and Dirk to go to supper with Jim and me. I really want to get to know this guy, uptight or not. Alexis grinned. So uptight he squeaks when he walks. Where's the WD-40? Debbie just laughed. It was obvious her boss was already half in love with the difficult man she'd married. When Alexis got home from work that night, Dirk was sitting in the living room. He looked up immediately. "I was worried about you. Didn't you say you'd get off work at 3? It's after 4:30. I'm sorry, I ended up having a client at 3, and then it took me longer than it should have to get here because it was rush hour. Why didn't you call or text?" She grinned at him. "Why didn't you call me when you realized I was late?" "I don't have your phone number." "And why didn't I call you?" Dirk blinked as the answer slowly dawned on him. "Let's exchange numbers now, so that doesn't happen again." "Great idea." She pulled her phone out and waited for him to give her his number. She called it, and after his rang, she hung up. "There. Now we have each other's numbers." "Good, don't scare me like that again." "As soon as I realized I would be late, I pulled my phone out to text you, and then I realized I didn't have your number. I felt very stupid. I told my assistant that if you called, she should let you know I'd be late. She couldn't figure out why I didn't just text you." "Did you tell her?" he asked, a grin slowly spreading across his face. She really had been in an awkward position due to their lack of foresight. "And admit that I didn't have my own husband's phone number? Do you think I've lost my mind?" She sat down beside him on the couch, snuggling against him. "How were classes today? Anything happen with Desiree?" "Nothing at all. She looked at me strangely a couple of times, but she didn't seem to tell the whole world." "Good." She sniffed. "Something smells good." "What is that?" "Tacos. Mrs. Ramintz made TVP for me and ground beef for you." "What is TVP?" she asked, knowing she was going to regret it. "It stands for texturized vegetable protein. It's a defatted soy flour. If you mix it with taco sauce, you can't even tell the difference between that and beef. It's so good. I bet I could tell the difference." She shook her head. "Besides, I'm allergic to soy." "Are you really?" She nodded. "I am. And soy is in everything. It makes me so sick." "Wow. I think I'd starve if I couldn't have soy." "I feel bad for you. I'll take meat over soy any day." "I'm not going to bug you to be a vegetarian anymore then." "Good. Because I'm really happy with my carnivorous lifestyle." Alexis moved away from him. "Let's go eat some tacos." "Sounds good to me." Friday evening, Alexis reminded Dirk that she was meeting her friends for lunch the next day. "Exactly how far are you driving?" he asked. She shrugged. "It's about 4 hours each way. Our lunches are usually about 3 hours. So, I'll probably be gone 11 or 12 hours. I'm driving you." She stared at him for a moment. "You'll be bored to tears going to lunch with the 4 of us." "I won't, because I won't go to lunch with you. I'll eat somewhere else or I'll get a table by myself wherever you go. But I'm not comfortable with you driving that far by yourself. You do realize I've been making this drive every month for 4.5 years, right? Not since you've been married to me, you haven't." Alexis started to argue with him, but she realized it would be nice not to have to make the drive alone for a change. "All right. You can drive me." She'd have to be stupid to complain to him about this. "What time do we need to leave?" "We always do lunch at 1, because we're all driving a distance. I like to leave by 8:30. Then if there's any kind of traffic, it's not really a problem. I'll be ready to go." He pulled her toward him, kissing her softly. "I've really missed you this week. We've both been busy, and work is good for us, but I've missed having you around all the time." She smiled, thrilled that he had said that. "You know, I think I've missed you, too. We should go hiking again on Sunday." He nodded eagerly. "I'd love that. I'm glad we found something that we both enjoy so much to do together." "Me too." On the drive to the Four Corners, they discovered something else they had in common. Dirk listened to the same kind of music she did. Alexis was ecstatic. "I can't believe you like 80s retro too." "I love it. And Billy Joel." How I love Billy Joel. He grinned at her. I wonder what your students would say to the mad professor listening to Billy Joel. It just doesn't seem like you. Mad professor? Do you have me confused with your other husband? He asked. I don't think so. You're the only professor in my life. I promise. That's a good thing. I wouldn't want to have to fight with a history professor for your affections. When they finally reached their destination, he noticed a vegan restaurant across the street. I've heard really good things about that place. Go eat meat, my dear, and I will eat healthy. She didn't tell him again that meat was healthy. She couldn't. He was making her crazy with it, though. Enjoy your tofu. Just remember to brush your teeth when you're done, she said with a wink. She went into the restaurant and Sydney was already there. How do you beat me here every week? She asked. I guess I am just better at judging time. You're even more obsessively early than I am, you mean. Did I just see you get out of a car? Where's your Jeep? Sydney asked after they'd ordered drinks. They ate at the same restaurant every month, so the waitress knew them. Dirk decided it was too far for me to drive alone, so he drove me. He's eating at the vegan place across the street. How's it going with you two? You happy? Alexis nodded. Strangely enough, I am. He's a good man. He makes me absolutely crazy at times. Like so crazy, I want to strangle him in his sleep, but we finally found something we have in common, and we're making things work. We're very compatible physically, it's just the rest of it we're having to work on. Oh, do tell. That's all the information about my sex life you're getting. Are you sure? Sydney frowned at her. I seem to remember making a pact our freshman year that whoever had sex first would give the other all the dirty details. We're not 18 anymore, Sid. Get married and figure out the details on your own. Alexis would talk to clients about their sex lives all day, but her sex life was off limits. Fine. Sydney said. Tess rushed in then. She dropped her purse at the table and immediately headed for the bathroom. Sydney looked at Alexis. Don't they have medicine for overactive bladders? Or Depends. I think she needs Depends. Joanna set her things on the table and took a seat. No one has ever needed Depends like Tess needs Depends. She looked at Alexis. Dish. How's married life? An adjustment. But I'm married to a good man who I am very attracted to. I'm sure it's all going to work out fine in the end. Alexis took a sip of her drink. What's he like though? We saw him at the wedding of course, and he's handsome. But, is he as uptight as he looks? Joanna asked. Yes. He's worse than he looks really. I have never met a man so obsessed with his reputation. Alexis noticed that Tess had taken her seat. We went hiking last Saturday. It's one of two things we've discovered we have in common other than sex. Anyway, we were at the top of this trail where almost no one goes. We had a good picnic lunch, and then we kissed on our picnic blanket. No big deal, Tess said. Well, he's a marketing professor, and one of his students happened to walk up to us while we were kissing. And we were going at it pretty good. Alexis shook her head. He came unglued. Like, furious with me for ruining his reputation that way. Wow, Joanna said. And you're a free spirit, not caring what anyone thinks of you. How's that going to work? We're learning to compromise. I was so mad at him for acting like I'd ruined his life. I tried to talk to him on the way down, and he wouldn't say anything, so by the time we got to the bottom of the mountain, I didn't want to talk anymore. Ever again. And we had a very silent dinner, and almost 24 hours without talking. I finally gave in, because I realized that's what I'd tell one of my clients to do. Sydney made a face. I hope that kind of fight doesn't become the norm for you too. I really don't think it will. We talked it out, and I forgave him. We're good now. In fact, he insisted on driving me here, because 8 hours round trip is too far to drive by myself. The others laughed. Did you tell him you've been making this drive once a month for 4.5 years? Tess asked. I did. And he didn't much care. He's still driving me. Alexis shrugged. It was nice not to make the whole trip alone. Now, has anyone else heard from Dr. Lachele? Am I getting out my bridesmaid dress soon? Joanna raised her hand. She called me this week. I thought about calling, but I figured I'd let you know since we were lunching this weekend. I have a match and a wedding date. She took a deep breath. May 15th. How do you feel about it? Tess asked her. I don't know. I mean, I'm thrilled the guys at the gym will have to quit hitting on me once I'm married, but other than that, I'm nervous. I know that Alexis keeps saying things will work out for her, but she married someone that sounds like her exact opposite. What if Dr. Lachele matches me with someone who spends all his time eating potato chips and watching professional wrestling? That would be interesting, Sydney said, shaking her head. I cannot imagine you with the man that mental image brings up. Of course you can't. It wouldn't fit me at all. Joanna sighed. I'm just going to keep up the faith that she's going to do a good job for me. That's all you can do, Alexis said. I can tell you that I've never been as attracted to a man physically as I am to Dirk. He's my opposite in so many ways, but sexually, we're a matched set. Salt and pepper shakers. Peanut butter and jelly. Applesauce and chocolate chip cookies. Tess made a face. You know you're the only person in the world who dips their chocolate chip cookies in applesauce, right? Well, that's a shame, because it's amazing. Alexis sighed. Almost as good as cheese and hot chocolate. Sydney made a gagging sound. You're killing me. Look at the menu and pick out some real food. Aren't you glad we're not all eating across the street with Dirk? Tessa's eyes grew wide. He's eating vegan food? On purpose? Alexis grinned. I married a vegetarian. She watched Joanna and Tess as the information sank in. But, you're a carnivore. Have you ever even eaten a vegetable? Joanna asked. Once, but I didn't like it. Alexis looked up as the waitress arrived, ordering her food, but exchanging the salad for a bowl of soup. After the others had ordered, she said, Do you believe Dr. Lachele did that to me? She knows about my meat eating too. He asked me if I'd raise my kids vegetarian. Tess started laughing. Loudly. What did you say? Sydney asked, knowing it would be something sarcastic and probably awful. I told him my kids would be raised with a piece of bacon in one hand and a stick of salami in the other. Alexis grinned. He knows full well what he's getting into. I can see he does, Joanna said. You're a mess and a half, Alexis. I'm proud of it too. Chapter 6. On their way home, Alexis happily chattered about her lunch with the girls. How did you like the vegan place? It was amazing. I had eggplant parmesan, and I have never eaten better. I will drive you every time for the opportunity to eat at that amazing restaurant, Dirk told her. Works for me. I don't think I realized just how lonely this drive was until today. You made it so much better. He didn't take his eyes from the road, but he did grin. I'm glad. I like to drive, and I like to know you're safe, so I'll feel better making the drive anyway. You should pull over somewhere so we can kiss. I keep telling you. We have a bed for that. Just because I kiss you doesn't mean I want to jump your bones. Sometimes I just like to kiss you. He let out a low chuckle and she smiled, feeling as if she was doing her job properly. Your colorful phrases do have a way of getting to me. She shrugged. Colorful phrases are what I'm all about. They stopped for supper as soon as they got back to Albuquerque. You don't want to cook, do you? He asked as he pulled into the parking lot of a pizza place. I feel like pizza tonight. Me too. She jumped out of the car. Let's each get our own, so your yucky veggies don't touch my side. I don't want your yucky meats to touch my side. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, walking toward the door. He never would have thought they'd have figured out how to coexist so easily in just 2 weeks. Maybe Dr. Lachele hadn't lost her mind after all. Once they were sitting together in a small booth, the waitress approached the table. "Hi, Dr. Blanton." She did a double take. "Alexis? You two know each other?" Alexis smiled at her client she had seen just the day before. "We got married 2 weeks ago today." Jessica stared at them. "Really? I would never have put you two together." She looked back and forth between them as if they'd totally lost their minds. "Seriously, how did this happen?" "Opposites attract," Alexis said with a smile. She had a feeling that Dirk would feel as if his reputation was totally shattered if she admitted they'd been introduced at the altar. "I guess," Jessica shook her head. "Okay, let's talk food. What do you want?" Dirk answered for both of them. "We want to share an order of cheesy garlic bread, and then I'd like a medium veggie pizza. Put every veggie you can find on it." She would like a medium meat pizza. "No anchovies," Alexis put in. "To drink?" Jessica asked, still seeming a bit dazed by seeing the two of them together. "I'd like a Coke," Alexis said. She knew Dirk wouldn't approve, but she didn't care. "I'd like water." Dirk looked at his student, wondering why she was so shocked he could be with a beautiful, fun-loving woman like Alexis. Was he really so different? Small children didn't run in the other direction when they saw him. Jessica made notes of everything and hurried away. Dirk frowned at Alexis. "Why is it so shocking we're married?" Alexis shrugged. "I think it's that we're so, well, oil and water doesn't seem to cover it. In some ways, we're salt and pepper all the way. In others, it doesn't feel like we're from the same solar system, let alone the same planet." "In what way?" he asked. "Let's start with dress," she said softly. "You dress like a college professor, which makes a whole lot of sense. You wear suits and sweaters with patches on the elbows. I wear skirts that come above the knee. I'm very conservative in my dress by most standards, but I do stay up to date with styles. Next to you, I look like I'm prancing around in a string bikini around a bunch of women who cover themselves entirely when they swim. Do people really see me as so serious?" "Yes, they do. You are very concerned about your reputation. I think people should be who they want to be, and the rest of the world should just have to deal with it. We have very different philosophies on life, but that's all right. As long as we're happy together, no one else should care." Dirk couldn't help but wonder if simply being seen with her was hurting his reputation. And then he wasn't sure if he should care. She was a good woman, at least she seemed to be to him. He'd really only known her for 2 weeks. "Have you ever been arrested?" he asked. "Nope. Not once." If anyone else had asked her the question, she'd be offended. But she understood it coming from Dirk. "Have you ever gotten drunk and been nude in public?" Alexis had to laugh at that. "Never. I've never even been drunk. I can't seem to make myself enjoy the taste of alcohol." "Have you ever gone skinny dipping?" "Yes, during spring break, my sophomore year. It was my 3 best friends and me, and we swam in the ocean together late one night. No one saw us." He frowned. "What other illicit behavior do I need to know about?" She sighed. "You're not going to find nude pictures of me floating around the internet or anything, if that's what you're asking. Compared to most people, I live a boring life. I have my ears pierced, but those are my only piercings. I have no tattoos. I have never had a boob job." She looked down at her breasts. "I think the girls look pretty good, though, don't you?" Dirk blushed. "You don't really expect me to answer that in public, do you? I don't think there's anything wrong with thinking your wife has nice breasts. In fact, I think it's wonderful. It makes us more compatible in bed." Just as she said the last 3 words, Jessica walked back to the table. "I'll just pretend I didn't hear that. I brought your drinks. Your garlic bread will be out any minute." With that, Jessica hurried away. Dirk frowned at Alexis. "Really? Do you spend nights awake thinking about ways you can embarrass me in public and absolutely ruin my reputation? Why does it ruin your reputation for people to know you have an active sex life with your wife? Shouldn't you be able to enjoy sex?" He sighed. I suppose I should, but I shouldn't be talking about it in public. But why not? Sex is a very natural act. Without sex, there would be no babies. And not as much smiling. I know it is. But, I guess I don't feel like it's something that people should be so open about. What we do in the privacy of our bedroom should be just that, private. And it is. I haven't discussed our sex life with anyone. Well, not really anyway. Dirk closed his eyes. The woman was either going to make him the happiest man alive, or he was going to strangle her in her sleep. He wasn't sure which would happen at this point. What do you mean, not really? Well, my friends and I glossed over the subject today. They wanted details, and all I'd tell them was it was wonderful. Why did you have to even tell them that? Well, it will only help your reputation, right? Dirk frowned. Yes, but will I be able to look them in the eyes the next time I see them? I assume I'll be seeing them often. Alexis grinned. Yup. We have a wedding on May 15th. I'll be a bridesmaid. Lovely. I can't wait to see them and not be able to look them in the eye, and then they'll assume I'm shy, and I'm not. I just don't like very private things in my life being discussed with others. I hope you didn't go into too much detail? Jessica pushed the plate of garlic bread into the middle of the table. Still not listening. Your sex life is your business. Not mine. She hurried away. He shook his head. We need to change the subject immediately. She already knows too much about our lives together. All right. Alexis felt like he was being silly, but she didn't tell him. If it mattered that much to him, then she could honor his wishes. Do you like to do jigsaw puzzles? He shrugged. I love jigsaw puzzles. I did them all the time as a kid, but I haven't done one in years. She smiled. Why don't we stop at Walmart on the way home? We can grab a couple of puzzles to work on together. I wouldn't mind that. He smiled, reaching out to take her hand in his. I think finding things we both like to do should be of the utmost importance. We can't spend all of our time in the bedroom. I didn't hear that. Jessica called as she put the 2 pizzas on the table along with some extra napkins. You wave me over when you're ready for me. I keep interrupting, and I really don't want to do that anymore. Dirk closed his eyes and counted to 10. You changed the subject and I brought it back just as she approached the table. How did that happen? I guess you have sex on the brain just as much as I do. It was all Alexis could do not to giggle at the look on his face. He was mortified. I'm going to have to leave her 100% tip and beg her to keep her mouth shut. Jessica? Alexis asked, shaking her head. She's not a gossip. She won't say anything, but she'll probably be embarrassed every time she sees you from now on. It could be worse. You said she's a client of yours. Will she stop seeing you over this? Nah. She will just blush the first time, and we'll move on from there. No big deal. She and I have worked together for more than a year, and we have a particularly close relationship. I think that's why she was so surprised to see me married. I hadn't mentioned it to her. Do you tell your clients about your life? He asked. I thought they were supposed to tell you about their lives. Oh, they are. And I do a little, in between them telling me. Or I use examples of my own life, to help them to feel better about themselves. Not a big deal either way. I see. I guess I use examples from my own life in my teaching as well. Not always, because I prefer to use textbook examples, but sometimes it's easier to explain with my own life stories. He shrugged. When they left the restaurant, he did leave Jessica a larger than normal tip. He scrawled the words, "I'm so sorry," on the back of the receipt, hoping she would see them. As soon as they were in the car, she got a phone call. Oh, it's my mom. I'd better answer. It's odd that I haven't met your parents yet. Hello? Hey, Alexis. How's married life? Did you really go through with marrying a stranger? Her mother asked. You knew I would. I've been thinking about this since I interned with Dr. Lachele all those years ago. And I'm thrilled that I did. Married life couldn't be better. I'm glad to hear it. Tell me about him. Alexis glanced over at Dirk, wondering what exactly she should say with him listening. Well, his name is Dirk Blanton, and he's a professor of marketing here at the university. He likes to hike and do puzzles. I think a lot of him. I think I'm falling in love with him. Sounds like a good match for you. I can't wait to meet him. We're still planning on flying out there in June. Alexis quickly muted her phone. Can I invite my parents to stay with us in June? Dirk looked startled for a moment before nodding. Yes, of course. I would like to get to know them better, and I'm not teaching summer school this year. Alexis unmuted. Why don't you stay with us? We have plenty of room. Her mother hesitated for a moment. I'm not sure, sweetie. You two are newlyweds. We'll be newlyweds whether you stay with us or not. Trust me. It'll be fine. All right. I'll give you the dates we're traveling as soon as we buy our tickets. Sounds great, Mom. What else is new in your world? Her mother asked. Well, Dirk is a vegetarian, so there's a lot of time spent trying to figure meals out. Her mother laughed. You married a vegetarian? The world is about to explode. I know. Crazy, huh? We're working things out though. We have a lot of differences, but we're learning to compromise and work through them. I'm glad to hear that. It sounds like he's a good man. I can't wait to meet him. Your father said to tell you hi, by the way. Tell Dad hi. Both of Alexis's parents were teachers, and they tried to travel to see her every summer. She loved spending the time with them, and they loved getting out of the city to go somewhere rural. Only a New Yorker would consider Albuquerque rural, though. I'll talk to you later. Pay attention to your husband. I'm glad it's working out for you. After hanging up, Alexis thought about what she'd almost said to her mother. She was falling in love with Dirk? Yes, she'd hoped it would happen, but it seemed all they'd done was argue so far. How could she be falling in love with him? Everything all right? Dirk asked, looking at her as he stopped for a light. Yeah, everything is good. My parents are teachers, and they like to visit me in the summer while they're off work. I usually try to fly there at Christmas time. Where is there? New York City. I grew up there, and my parents still live in the same apartment I lived in when I was a little girl. Dirk smiled. I wish I had some kind of place like that to return to. My grandparents all died before I was born. My parents were only children. My parents are gone now too. Nothing seems to be home to me. Maybe wherever we are will become home. The conversation made her think about something they hadn't really discussed. I know you want children, but how many? He shrugged. I haven't thought about it in great detail, but at least 2, I think. I don't want my child to be an only child. It's a lonely life. What if I want 15? Alexis asked with a grin. He refused to take her bait, knowing she was messing with him. He was starting to recognize that tone she got to her voice when she was teasing. Then I think we'll have to get a bigger house. I don't think it would be legal to have 17 people living here. Probably not. How many do you really want? He asked. He was flexible on the number, because he'd never really thought about it. He just knew he didn't want to die alone. I don't know. At least 2. Maybe more, depending on whether or not I have difficult pregnancies. I think that's very logical, Dirk said softly. Do you want children immediately? I hope we do. I'm not taking birth control. I told Dr. Lachele that I wanted kids, and I assumed she matched me with someone who wanted them as well. Well, then we'll see how it goes. I would like them soon. I hadn't thought about when until just now, but yeah. Soon sounds good to me. Good. Then we'll carry on as we have been. He pulled the car into the driveway and turned to her. It's been a long day, he said softly. It really has. The days I drive to meet my friends always seem to take forever. Maybe we should go to bed early and start our carrying on now. She laughed. You sure do have a way with words, Professor. I am a college professor, after all. Not linguistics maybe, but I've learned a thing or two over the years. Learning is good. She got out of the car and stretched. You know what? I think I need a shower before we start carrying on. I feel like I'm all sweaty after so many hours in the car. That's fine. I'll check my email while I wait for you. But hurry. Alexis pressed a kiss to his lips. I'll do my best. She hurried into the house before he could scold her for kissing him outside. He found it mattered to him less and less with every day that passed anyway. She was special, and kissing wasn't just for sex, she'd said. It was for showing affection. He was going to show her a lot of affection as soon as she finished with her shower. He grinned as he locked the front door and set the security alarm. Alexis had already changed his life in more ways than he could count. Now if they could just get through the next few months without him killing her, he was sure their marriage would last forever. Chapter 7. While at work on Monday, Alexis realized that she was in over her head with Dirk. In the beginning, she'd been sure he needed her so he could learn to laugh. Now she wondered if she'd needed him so she could learn to be serious. Everything about him infuriated her, while at the same time, she felt herself falling a little more in love with him every day. Was it really love when she could see him for exactly who he was, warts and all, and she could put up with those things? Well, she could mostly put up with him. She really did want to strangle him in his sleep at times. On her way home, she brainstormed meals she could cook on the weekends that would make them both happy. She came up with several and shopped for them, texting him that she'd be a little late. Mrs. Remintz had started cooking for both of them in creative ways, making sure there were things they'd both like that were part of any meal. When she arrived home, Dirk was waiting for her. I waited for you. I want to watch my documentary, but I thought we could work on our puzzle at the same time. That sounds great, she told him. Let me just get these groceries put away. She hurried into the kitchen and unloaded the 2 bags she'd purchased, putting everything into the refrigerator. She sat down with him at the table, and they began working on the puzzle again. She took the sky because she liked to play with the different nuances of blue in a puzzle. You have the entire summer off, right? He nodded. From the last week in May until the first week in August. So, 2 full months and a little more. Why? Alexis smiled. Well, we didn't get to take a honeymoon, and I have an idea for one. What is it? I want to go to Disney World. It's a place I've never been but always wanted to go. We could stay on Disney property, and you can take buses and boats and monorails wherever you go. What would you think of that? He frowned. You really want to see Disney that badly? He had no desire to go to a world where a giant mouse was the center of attention. I really do. There are resorts that are designed for adults and not kids. I spent my whole lunch hour researching. Epcot is a huge learning experience. Did you know that the word Epcot stands for Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow? He sighed. What kind of learning can you do at Epcot? Well, mainly you can learn about different countries. I looked at a map, and the park is shaped like a giant number 8. At the back, there are all these little villages about different countries, and there are shops, but museums as well. At the front, you can create your own car and then actually feel what it would be like to drive it. Wouldn't that be fun? She didn't mention the bride and groom mouse ears she wanted them to wear. He wouldn't be a fan of that at all. I guess. Please? The single word, and the way she said it, had him nodding. Sure. I'm probably going to kick myself for agreeing later, but I'll do it. Alexis hurried around the table to him, plopping down in his lap and throwing her arms around him. You're the best husband I've ever had. He shook his head. I'm the only husband you've ever had. So, I could have called you the worst, but I called you the best. See how generous I am? I do. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. When do you want to go to Disney? Let's go as soon as you're off school. Maybe we can beat some of the crowds that way. I want to stay on one of the lakes there, and I want to buy all kinds of Disney stuff for our house. Don't you think the kitchen would look better with a Mickey Mouse cookie jar or a Mickey Mouse crock pot? I'm not even sure what to say to that, Alexis. But having a giant rodent staring at me all the time might make me a little uncomfortable. I promise, I'll make a Mickey lover of you before we leave to come home. I can do it, you know. I know you think you can. He kissed her softly. Are you hungry? Starving. Any idea what Mrs. Remintz made tonight? Let's go see. Together, they went into the kitchen, finding their dinner and sitting down to eat. I love that I never have to cook. Can we keep Mrs. Remintz forever? He shrugged. Until you stop working to be with the children. She blinked at him. What do you mean? I'm going to keep working. We'll hire a nanny or put them in a daycare. She liked the nanny idea a great deal more than daycare, but she wasn't about to quit her career. But, you want someone else to raise our children? If he'd been anyone else, she would have assumed he was teasing her, trying to get her goat, but he was Dirk, and Dirk didn't tease. I want to raise my children, but I need to be able to work. Do you have any idea how many years I went to school to become a life coach? I love my job. He frowned. You love your job more than our future children? At the moment, yes. I haven't met our future children yet. I adore everything I do at work. I might be able to cut down to 4 days per week, but I'm not going to give up working. Dirk stared at her, trying to decide if she was joking with him, which she often did. Surely, she wasn't the type of woman who would leave her children all day while she made her own dreams come true. It just didn't seem like she could be that person. They finished their meal in silence, both thinking the other person was crazy. Finally, just before she went to put the dishes in the dishwasher, she asked, "Was your mother a stay-at-home mom?" Of course. She gave up her career as a receptionist to stay home with me. Dirk was surprised she'd even asked. Do you know the educational differences between qualifying to be a receptionist and qualifying to be a life coach? I did 4 years of college and grad school. Your mother most likely finished high school, but probably didn't even have to do that. What difference does it make? She made me her priority. The difference is she didn't throw away 6 years of higher education to make you a priority. I promise you that my children will be my ultimate priority. But I will continue to work. He shook his head. Are we ever going to agree on this? I don't know. Will you ever see reason? He got up from the table and walked into the living room, flipping the television on to one of his boring documentaries. Alexis could see she'd been dismissed. She loaded the dishwasher and headed back to their bedroom, filling up a hot bath. As soon as she was in the tub, soaking up the glory of the heat, she went into the contact list on her phone and tapped Dr. Lachele's name. Dr. Lachele answered on the first ring. I promise he's perfect for you. Just hold out a little longer. You knew he was going to make me crazy, didn't you? Yes, but I knew the two of you could work through it to find your happily ever after. You just have to trust me. Alexis groaned. Do you realize he was just talking to me about after I quit working to stay home with the kids? Dr. Lachele laughed. I'm not at all surprised. The man is different, I'll give you that. But he's a good man, and he is the right man for you. Talk through it. Or don't talk about it for a while and give him time to see that you're good at what you do and you genuinely help people. What's the sentence for strangling a man in his sleep? Does the he needed killing defense actually work? Only in Texas. I might have to talk him into moving to Texas then. Alexis sighed and sank deeper into the water. Do you have any idea how obsessed the man is with his reputation? He's sure I'm going to make it so he'll never get tenure. He asked me if I'd ever gotten drunk and shown up in public naked. Dr. Lachele's cackle came through the line loudly. That sounds exactly like Dirk. You'll get there. I promise you will. What do I do in the meantime? I really do want to hurt him. Have you thought about taking up violent video games? Maybe if you got a sword and whacked a few monsters in the head with it, you could take some aggression out that way. Alexis grinned. Haven't there been studies that show violent video games just make people more violent? I'm sure there have. People are messed up in the head regardless. That's why we can make a living doing what we do. Dr. Lachele? Yes? I just need you to tell me one more time it's going to work. Please. It really is going to work, Alexis. You just have to give it time. And I'm watching my beautiful grandbaby, so I'm not talking to you anymore. Love you. Hang in there. With those words, the phone went dead. Alexis sighed, and stared down at her phone. A mindless game of match 3 might be the answer. Something had to be. By the time Dirk was over his anger enough to go to bed, Alexis was sound asleep on her side of the bed. He considered waking her for a little bit of newlywed fun, but instead he set his alarm for 30 minutes early in the morning. They'd both go to work with smiles on their faces. As Alexis was working with a couple the following day, she listened to them and realized Amanda and Dirk sounded the same way. She thinks she should get to stay home with the kids, and I say we need her income. You need it? Or you want it? Alexis asked. Normally she didn't do couples counseling, but Amanda had been her client for a few years. When she'd asked, Alexis didn't feel like she could say no. And aren't you borrowing trouble? She's not even pregnant yet. As soon as the words were out of her mouth, she realized that's exactly what she and Dirk had done the night before. She didn't understand why she couldn't see it when it was the two of them fighting, but when it was someone else, it was so obvious. I feel like we need it. Jack crossed his arms over his chest. Without her income, we'd have to cut back a lot. We'd have to cut out vacations. Alexis looked at Amanda. What do you think? I think we need to start saving half of my income from every paycheck now. Then we'll have a nest egg built up when I get pregnant. We don't even want to try for another year or two. Alexis looked at Jack. Does that work for you? It sounds like a good compromise to me. He frowned. I guess we could do that. Good. That sounds very smart. You two start saving now, and if you don't have a baby for a few years, then she can at least stay home until the baby starts kindergarten. Amanda looked like she wanted to say more, but Alexis shook her head slightly. She was getting her compromise now. If she pressed for more, it would only be detrimental to her cause. All right. Amanda nodded. Half of my paycheck goes into savings, and once the kids are in school, we'll discuss me working part-time. Jack nodded. All right. I can agree. Alexis looked at the clock on her wall. I think we solved some little problems today and worked more on compromise. Jack glanced at the clock. That's my cue that time's up, right? Alexis grinned. I think it might be. Amanda smiled at Alexis. Thank you for working with us. You're welcome. After they left, Alexis thought about Dirk and their relationship. She wanted to work, not for the money, but because she'd worked very hard to get where she was in her business. What if she built on a small room toward the back where there could be a nursery, and a nanny could be right there on the premises? She could nurse full-time, between clients, and she could always supervise things. There was a second office she wasn't using, and she'd thought about hiring a second counselor, but she didn't want to share her place. No, that might just work. She'd talked to Dirk about it that night. If he didn't like that solution, she'd find another. As soon as she got home, she went into the living room, knowing she'd find him there. He wasn't watching documentaries as she'd expected, but instead, he had papers spread all around him. Do you need some help? She asked softly. He shook his head. I don't think so. I'm just grading a pop quiz I gave in each of my classes today. She noticed then that there were several piles of papers. There must be one for each class. I'm going to work on the puzzle while you grade, then. She was disappointed that he was working at home, but she understood. His job was very important to him, just as hers was to her. He joined her at the table an hour later. Should we eat? She nodded, following her nose to the crock pot. Something smells wonderful? That's when she realized there were now 2 crock pots. This one is labeled, no meat. He laughed. So, we're both getting chili, but I get mine with TVP, and yours comes with beef. She's really working hard to accommodate us both. I hope you gave her a raise when we married. She's doing lots more work. My laundry as well as yours, and now cooking 2 meals every day. I didn't think about that. He reached up into a cabinet and got down 2 bowls. Might be time to think about it if we want to keep her on, and I think she's amazing. I will give her a bonus and let her know that she'll have a raise starting this week. Alexis smiled and reached up to kiss him. You're a good man. As long as I know there is something that needs to be done, I'm happy to do it, he told her. They filled their bowls with chili, and Alexis grabbed a sleeve of crackers. They each carried their own bowl into the dining room, not wanting to risk getting the other's food. It really was going to be interesting when it was time to start feeding children. Once they were settled and eating, Alexis brought up the subject of children. I have an extra office. How would you feel if I turned that into a nursery? Then I could have a nanny working there, and I could still nurse and be a part of my baby's daily routine. He tilted his head to one side as he considered her suggestion. You're working on compromising, aren't you? She nodded. I was working with a couple with the opposite problem today. She wanted to stop working when the babies come, and he wants her to keep working. She's going to start saving half of each paycheck, and they don't plan to try for a couple of years. By that time, she should have enough money saved to take some time off to be with children. That's a good compromise. So after they left, I thought about our argument last night, and I thought that if we could make it work with a nanny with the baby in my office, it wouldn't feel so much like someone else was raising our child. He nodded. I do think that would work for us. Are you all right with the idea? Alexis nodded. I was trying to figure out what to do with the extra space anyway. I thought about hiring someone else to work from it, but I really like working on my own. I mean, I like working with other people too, but I want someone that I can be sure my personality will mesh well with. Because you do enough fighting at home? You don't feel the need to do that much at work? She laughed. We're learning to compromise well, I think. We're both just very different people. We are. I still wonder sometimes if Dr. Lachele lost her mind hooking the 2 of us up. I don't think so. His words hurt though. Why, she wasn't sure, because she'd thought them herself multiple times. Hearing him say them made her sad. Well, I don't know what to think. On our wedding day, there was no doubt in my mind she had put us together as a joke. The longer we're married, the less sure of that I become. Alexis nodded, glad that he was at least doubting their lack of chemistry. I'm going to do the dishes and take a hot bath. That's my favorite way to unwind. So for our anniversary, you want bubble bath? She shook her head. Scented candles and bath bombs. Bubble bath is so 20th century. Dirk grinned, watching her walk away, admiring her backside. Who was he kidding? He liked her backside and her front side, and her side. The woman was amazing to look at, and he wondered again how he'd been so lucky as to be her husband. Chapter 8. As they settled into a routine of their marriage, Dirk and Alexis started to rely on one another more and more. She cooked for them on the weekends, and he took her hiking at least once a week. On the 4th Saturday of their marriage, they went back to hike on the same path where they had been caught kissing. It was warmer, and she dispensed with the coat, just wearing a pair of jeans and a long-sleeved shirt. They once again took a picnic that consisted of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. When they reached the summit, she spread their picnic out around them. I'll do my best not to molest you this time, she said softly. I know that's for the bedroom. It is, but sometimes it's fun when you grab me and kiss me wherever we are. It is? Definitely. He reached out and took her hand. Never doubt how attracted I am to you. I don't. Though it made her sad. It was obvious their attraction was very strong, but he didn't love her like she loved him. He still thought that Dr. Lachele had made a mistake matching them up, and she didn't think so at all. While they ate, he talked about his research project he was going to be working on all summer. I'm actually excited about our Disney trip now. They do marketing better than any other company. You see that silly mouse, and you know exactly what he represents. People are willing to spend astronomical amounts of money at Disney that they wouldn't spend for the same things elsewhere. She nodded. I did get the trip booked. We're going to stay at Saratoga Springs. It's not one of the overly themed places, from what I've read, so it might be a better place for us to stay. Do you only want to go to Epcot? He asked. I'd like to do all the parks, but I have a feeling that would make you grumpy. Not at all. I want to compare how themed each one is and consider the marketing aspects of each individual park. I'm excited about this trip in a way I didn't expect to be. After doing a bit more research, it truly is the right place to do my project. I wish I'd booked more than just a week now. I did manage to get us into the BR guest restaurant, which is usually booked 6 months out. You can't get in after that unless there's a cancellation, from what I understand. It's supposed to be a fabulous experience. They talked more about their trip as they finished eating. She wasn't sure if she should be offended that he was planning on doing research on what was essentially their honeymoon, but she decided not to be. Why be offended when it would only hurt her? One of her favorite things to tell people who carried a lot of anger around inside them was that anger only hurt them. It didn't hurt the person they were angry with. She talked a lot about writing letters to people who had hurt you and burning them. That way you got it out of your system, but no one was hurt. It was a method she'd learned in school, and it was a favorite. As they hiked back down the path, they ran into another of his students. He introduced her as his wife. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Blanton. It's nice to meet you, too. You two really don't seem like you should be together, the young man said. Even as it hurt Alexis, she laughed. We hear that a lot, but trust me. We are good together. In bed, if nowhere else. As they continued their hike, Dirk kept thinking about what his student had said. And what Jessica had said the weekend before. They really didn't seem like they should be together at all, but they were. And they were making it work. He just hoped she was as happy with their marriage as he was. After leaving the walking path, he looked over at her. Supper? She nodded. I have stuff to make fajitas tonight. I thought I could make some with just the veggies for you, and I'll add steak to mine. He frowned. Do you feel up to cooking after that long walk? She shrugged. I wouldn't mind. Why don't we just go out for supper instead? I don't want you getting too tired. I can't imagine standing in the kitchen after that hike today. Do you get sore after the hikes? I did in the beginning. Now I'm just tired when I'm done. Walking for that long, climbing half the way, is exhausting. He glanced at her. What about you? Do you get sore? Not really, but I do hike as much as I can. During the winter months, I tend to do a treadmill with a steep incline. I hate it, but my friend Joanna is a personal trainer, and she told me that was the way to keep from getting super sore when I can start hiking again. What gym do you belong to? She named her gym and he nodded. I've heard of it. I should go with you. Or I could always just put in a home gym in one of the spare rooms. Would you do that? He nodded. 2 treadmills would be great. We could walk side by side. She smiled. I'd like that. She wasn't sure why he was humoring her that way when he didn't think they belonged together, but she'd take it. The more time they spent together, the better the chance he would eventually love her as she loved him. She just wished it would happen soon. It felt very strange to be in a marriage with love only on one side. They went out for Mexican food that evening, and they both ordered fajitas. She ordered hers with no veggies, while he ordered his with no meat. Can I get guacamole in place of my meat? He asked. The waitress nodded. Sure. Vegetarian? Yes, I am. I'll make sure you get no meat then. I'm a carnivore. No veggies for me, please. Alexis had been made to feel ashamed for her salad-shunning ways, but she didn't care. She had the right to make decisions for her own body. She was allergic to both bell peppers and tomatoes. People found it hard to believe anyone could get sick from those things, but she did. and many other vegetables. Why should she suffer for the way people thought she should eat? It was like how Dirk felt about his reputation. He truly believed that everything he said and did was being watched by others, and she just didn't care. What difference did it make what others thought of her? Kale made her sick. Spinach made her sick. She wasn't going to fight her own nature for the way other people thought of her. When they finally got home that evening, she jumped in the shower. She would have preferred a bath, but she was too tired. She would shower and climb into bed. Maybe her sweet man would climb in with her. Most of the day Sunday was spent on their puzzle. Alexis and Dirk were both tired from their day of hiking, and a quiet day at home was just what they needed. It was just past lunchtime when a knock came at the door. Dirk went to the door and invited the person inside. "How can I help you today, Dr. Kippa?" "I was driving past your house, and I realized that I hadn't heard back from you about the dinner party I'm throwing Friday night." "Dinner party?" Dirk asked. He'd received no invitation. "Yes, it's for the marketing professors." Dirk immediately knew he needed to go. Schmoozing was something he hated with a passion, but it was part of the path to tenure. "Yes, of course, I'll be there." By the marketing professors, he knew that Dr. Kippa meant the men. For some reason, the female professors weren't invited to most of the dinner parties. "Feel free to bring a date if you'd like." Dirk tried to think about what it would be like to have Alexis with him at a dinner party full of stuffed shirts, people like him. Would she know better than to talk about their bedroom activities? He certainly hoped so. "I got married a few weeks ago. I'd love to bring my wife, if that's really okay." He knew he might be making the biggest mistake of his career, but he was married to one of the most beautiful women he'd ever met. Surely, she needed to be shown off a little. "That's fine." Dr. Kippa looked around. He'd been to Dirk's home multiple times, but Dirk had never been one to throw big dinner parties like Dr. Kippa. "Is she here? I'd love to meet her." Alexis looked down at the shorts and t-shirt she was wearing. It was perfect attire for spending the day at home doing a puzzle with her new husband, but it wasn't great for meeting one of his colleagues. There was no time to change though, so she stepped into the living room. "Hello. I'm Alexis, Dirk's wife." Dr. Kippa looked at Dirk. "Why didn't you tell anyone you'd married such a beautiful woman?" He shook his head. "I don't think anyone even knew he'd married. Or that you were seeing anyone. We've only been married for 3 weeks. We aren't quite ready to share each other with the world yet," Alexis said with a smile. "Well, it was nice meeting you, Mrs. Blanton. The party is at 7 on Friday night. I look forward to seeing you both then." After he was gone, Alexis turned to Dirk, waiting for him to tell her she shouldn't have let his associates see her the way she was dressed. Instead, Dirk pulled her into his arms and rested his cheek atop her head. "I do have the most beautiful wife in all of Albuquerque. It'll be fun to show you off at the party." "Show me off?" He shrugged. "I'm just saying that you're beautiful, and I think it'll be nice for others to see me as someone who can be married to a pretty woman." She shook her head. "Sometimes you infuriate me." "You always infuriate me." She grinned, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Maybe we should work off some of our aggression." Dirk grinned. "I do like the way you think, Mrs. Blanton." Later, while Dirk napped, Alexis lay in bed wondering. Would they always only be able to communicate when they were in bed together? Would Dirk ever see her as anything but a pretty girl on his arm? She knew she didn't give him enough credit, but he could have told the other man that she was a life coach. That she had a master's degree in psychology. No, she was going to the party as Dirk's pretty wife, not as an educated professional woman in her own right. She didn't know if it was a good idea to confront him about it or not. She wanted him to see her as a professional, educated woman, but she wasn't sure that was possible. Was he like Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory, thinking that anyone who didn't have a PhD like he did wasn't truly educated? She sighed, having no answers. Soon, though, they were going to have it out. She was going to have to make him see her for who she was, a strong and confident woman. Her looks had nothing to do with that. In fact, she'd always felt that they held her back. No one expected someone who was pretty to be smart as well. She wished people could see her insides and not just her outsides. Maybe someday, the world would be a better place, and she wouldn't lose IQ points simply because she was pretty and had good boobs. She hoped so anyway. When Alexis got home from work on Monday evening, Dirk smiled. "Do you want to go shopping tonight? We could find you something nice to wear for Friday night." Alexis frowned. "I have plenty of clothes to wear. Don't worry about that. Show me what you're going to wear then." "Why?" "I haven't picked anything out yet. I'm more of a figure out what to wear just before time to go kind of girl. Let's go look through your closet and see if there's something that would be good." Dirk could only think about her subduing her looks a little for his colleagues. He didn't want any of them lusting after his wife. She was his, and that was all there was to it. "Do you really think I'm going to embarrass you with what I wear?" "Embarrass me? Why would you think that?" he asked, surprised. "That's not what I'm worried about at all." "Then what are you worried about?" He shrugged. "I just want to help you feel like you fit in. You've never been to one of these boring academic dinner parties. I thought you'd be happier if you felt like you were dressed appropriately." "I don't plan on dressing inappropriately." "How do you know what's appropriate and what's not?" "You've never done one of these things, have you?" She sighed. "Are you really that worried about it?" "I wouldn't say I'm worried." "Fine. Let's go shopping. You can dress me up however you want. I'll be your Barbie doll." She was annoyed with him. More than she could really say. She wanted him to be proud of her for who she was, and here he was, insisting that he dress her. "I thought the mall would be the best place to start." He obviously missed the sarcasm in her voice. Alexis followed him out to the car, determined to not be offended by all this. He was trying to help her fit in. That wasn't a bad thing, was it? He took her to a department store and started flipping through the racks. He picked up a dress 3 sizes too big and handed it to her. "Try this on." She went to the rack he'd gotten the dress from and chose her size. "I'll be right back. I'll choose a couple of more things for you to try, just in case that doesn't look right." Alexis told herself over and over that he was just worried about his image, but that was still insulting. Why did he think she didn't know how to dress herself? She stepped out wearing the dress. It was a silky thing that clung to her breasts and showed off her hips. She liked how it looked, but she didn't know what look he was going for. He looked her up and down. "You should certainly get that, but not for what we're doing. You can wear that for me at home." He handed her 2 more outfits, and she headed back into the dressing room. "It's going to be a long night," she mumbled to herself as she stripped and put on the next dress. Finally, after 2 hours of going in and out of dressing rooms, she tried on something that met with his approval. "That's perfect for the image we want to project." "What if the image I want to project is different than the image you want me to project?" she asked. He frowned at her. "I don't know why it would be. I don't either." He was obviously so uptight about this, he was incapable of bending. Fine. She would let him do whatever he wanted. When they got home, she realized he'd purchased a great deal more than she'd thought. Almost everything she'd tried on had come home with them. "I don't need all this," she said softly. "No, you probably don't. But I liked how you looked in all of it, so you got it." She shrugged. What woman in her right mind didn't let her man spend money on clothes for her? She hung it all up in her closet and shut the closet door. The outfit he wanted her to wear Friday night seemed like something your average college professor would wear. She had no doubt he wanted her to wear it to fit in better. She detested the clothes and would wear them once and only once. Soon, they were going to have to talk about his ideas about her and the way she dressed. And so many other things. She couldn't keep going on as things were, but she'd wait until his party to talk to him. Otherwise, she would start crying, and she knew he wouldn't like that. He wasn't the kind of man who would know what to do when a woman cried. They had a late dinner and got ready for bed. Alexis felt as if her entire spirit had been crushed. He was grooming her now. Would he insist she wore her hair in a bun so no one could see that either? Maybe he would want her to wear a burqa. She wouldn't, but he could want it all day. When he reached for her, she pulled away from him, not wanting to be touched by a man who didn't respect her for herself. She wasn't a Barbie doll, no matter whether he wanted her to be or not. She was a grown woman who had been dressing herself with modesty for a whole lot of years. If he couldn't respect her for that, she didn't know why she was even with him. Dirk was surprised when she pulled away. He'd bought her a ton of new clothes that evening, including 2 new pairs of shoes. Why wouldn't she want to make love? It made no sense that she was upset, so he assumed she was tired. As he closed his eyes and fell asleep, he thought about how perfect she would look on Friday night. The party was going to be a success. He just knew it. Chapter 9. Alexis simply went through the motions of life that week. She was dreading the party on Friday night, not because she didn't think she'd enjoy it, but because Dirk was making it into such a big deal in his mind. He needed her to look perfect, and he needed to show her off as the perfect wife and partner. Alexis well knew that she was anything but perfect in anything. Why anyone would want her to be, she didn't know. When she'd worked with children, she often had them color as part of the therapy, and she was fond of telling them that perfect is boring. And now she was married to a man who expected perfection not only from himself, but from her as well. It made life hard. When Friday afternoon rolled around, she wanted to find some excuse, any excuse, not to go to the party. When she got home, Dirk had already laid her clothes out onto the bed. "I cut the tags off for you." She nodded, quickly changing into the formless, ugly clothes he'd chosen. Then he talked to her about how to do her makeup. And her hair. She did everything as he wanted, because this was his party. If it had been anything else in the world, she'd have told the man to get bent. When he deemed her ready to go, he got ready himself while she went to the kitchen for a snack. Anything. She wasn't certain she was going to be allowed to eat at the dinner party, so she wanted her stomach to be partially full when she got there. If she went nuts with the hangries, no one would be pleased with her. She had just finished a huge container of yogurt when he joined her in the kitchen. "Why are you eating? They'll have food at the party?" She shrugged. "I'm not sure if they'll have anything I can eat." She didn't add that she wasn't sure he'd let her eat, because that would have come across rudely, and she was doing everything in her power not to be rude with him. Even if she wanted to stab him with his own pen. He frowned. "There's usually a good selection." Walking to her, he wrapped his arms around her. "I'm excited for you to meet my colleagues." She looked up at him, trying to determine if he was telling the truth. "I promise to be on my best behavior." He frowned. "I know you will. Let's just make sure we don't talk about our sex lives all the time." "Afraid your friends will envy you?" she asked, feeling a little better about the whole situation. "Very much so," he said with a grin. When they arrived at the party, Alexis stayed as close to his side as she could. Dr. Kippa was standing with his wife at the door. Alexis looked at the other woman's clothes, and she realized they were wearing the exact same thing in different colors. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Kippa." "Oh, please, call me Janice." "Mrs. Kippa sounds so formal, and I'm sure we're going to be the best of friends." Alexis smiled. "Janice, then." No one even knew that Dr. Blanton was seeing anyone. "The news of his marriage comes as a shock to all of us." Janice shook her head. "How long have the two of you known one another?" "Not long. Our romance was a whirlwind. We've only been married about 3 weeks. Well, we're happy he's found love. For a while, it seemed like he never would. He's always been so dedicated to his research that we worried he would never have time to find someone. We're both avid hikers," Alexis said, letting the other woman draw whatever conclusions she would from that. "It's so nice to find a man who shares the same interests." "I see. That makes sense. I think I'd heard it mentioned he's a hiker." Janice led her away from the men, and Alexis glanced over her shoulder at Dirk, knowing he wouldn't be pleased if he couldn't hear every word she said. "I wish we'd at least had a chance to throw you a bridal shower." Alexis thought about the shower her friends had given her. It had really been a night out with lots of laughter. His friends would never have been able to match it. "I'm sure you'll have a chance when we start having children," Alexis said with a smile. "Oh, that's true. You're not." Alexis laughed softly. "Not that I know of. We've only been married a short while, though. I'm sure it will happen." The wives of the marketing professors often have long lunches together during the week. "We're having one Wednesday if you'd like to join us." It was at that moment that Alexis realized she'd rather gouge her own eye out with a rusty spoon. "I work during the week. I'd be happy to otherwise." White lies didn't count as real lies, did they? Either way, Alexis couldn't care. She would die of boredom trying to have a meal with the woman. "Oh? What do you do?" "I'm a life coach." "Oh. That's like being a counselor, but helping people differently?" "I think." Alexis smiled. "I try to guide people through the intricacies of life." "How interesting. You'll have to tell me if someone I know is one of your patients." "We call them clients, and I couldn't break confidentiality in that way." Alexis said a silent prayer that Dirk would come over and rescue her. Mrs. Kippa sighed. "I guess I like confidentiality in a friend, but not if they are keeping things from me. I have to respect my work and my clients." "Well, you won't be doing that much longer anyway." "Not after the children start coming, of course. I plan to continue working. I didn't get 6 years of higher education so I could spend my life staying home with children. We're talking about renovating my office so that a nanny could be right there with me. Then I could still nurse the baby and be a bigger part of his or her life." "I see." Alexis could see that Janice was dying to rush off and tell all her friends the things she'd learned about her. Maybe she should pretend to be mute. Laryngitis could spring right before each of these parties. Then she'd be sure never to embarrass Dirk. "I think it will be the perfect solution for us. Would you like me to introduce you to some of the other wives?" Janice asked. "Certainly." As Alexis was drawn further away from Dirk, she hoped she was as circumspect as he wanted her to be. She had a feeling she was never going to fit in with these women. They weren't going to make her happy. By the time they sat down for their meal, Alexis had met 4 of the other women. She didn't like any of them. They were all as old-fashioned in their beliefs as Janice, and they looked like carbon copies of one another. The next time she came to one of these, after she'd made a good first impression, she was going to wear whatever she wanted to wear and just let them gossip about her. They were a bunch of busybodies, and she did not need women like that in her life. She and Dirk were seated together, and he squeezed her hand under the table. She wasn't quite sure if he was trying to subdue her or if he was giving her support. Either way, she felt more connected to him. During the meal, the women were mostly silent as the men talked about work. The department head, Dr. Johnson, was there, and the other men definitely agreed with everything he said. As Alexis observed Dirk in his natural habitat, she understood a great many more things about him than she had before. She understood why he was so obsessed with what she wore, for starters. She would have felt ridiculous wearing any of the clothes she normally wore. No, he'd been right to pick out her clothes for her, though she felt hideously frumpy in them. Also, it made sense why he was so obsessed with his reputation. Just as she made that conclusion, she realized every eye at the table was on her. "I'm sorry. Did I miss something?" she asked. She'd spaced out the conversation just as quickly as her brain would allow. Dr. Johnson smiled at her. "I was just asking how you and Dr. Blanton met. He's not known for dating a lot of women." Alexis smiled, feeling his hand squeeze hers under the table again. "We both enjoy hiking a great deal," she said softly. She knew he would be mortified if she explained they'd met at the altar as part of a match made by a crazy purple-haired woman. "We saw each other on trails multiple times, and finally started talking." His hand relaxed in hers. "Yes, that's true. She was so beautiful that it was hard for me to strike up a conversation, but I finally managed it, and we started seeing each other." "That's a nice story," Mrs. Johnson said. Obviously, it was all right for women to talk as long as they were talking about non-marketing things. We also love doing jigsaw puzzles together. It brings us closer. We can talk or work together in silence. How nice. Janice smiled at her. Alexis could see on her face that she'd already been talking about them. Lovely. I think so, Alexis said sweetly. I never dreamed I'd marry someone like Dirk, but the differences just melt away every time he touches me. Dirk squeezed her hand at that point, letting her know she'd said too much. There's always something comforting in the touch of the one you love, he said. Alexis smiled at him adoringly, thinking about the conversation she was going to have with him later. These women, they weren't like her, and that was good in her opinion. Being compared to them would break her heart. Well, I'm happy to see that Dr. Blanton is happy now. You seem like the perfect addition to the wives of the department, Dr. Johnson said with a smile. Janice frowned. I'm not so sure about that, she said softly. Mrs. Blanton not only works, but she doesn't plan to stop once children come. She said that she and Dr. Blanton have made a compromise, and she will hire a nanny to watch the children in her office. Alexis bit her tongue, trying her best not to be rude back to the harridan. I don't have a doctorate, but I do have a master's degree, and with the time I spent in higher education, I'd like to have something to show for it. Her eyes landed on Janice, her smile cold and calculated. Did you not have a nanny or anyone to help with your children? Well, of course, I did, but it wasn't so I could work outside the home. I was planning parties and doing charitable work. There's a big difference. Alexis nodded. There is a big difference. I'm doing something real with my life, and you're putting on airs to show everyone how much better you are than them. Janice gasped in shock. Well, I never. Maybe you should. It might help you get that huge stick out of your butt. Alexis took a sip out of her water glass, completely ignoring the wine that was beside her plate. And maybe if you bothered to get to know Dr. Blanton a little bit, you'd realize he's a vegetarian, and he hasn't eaten a bite of the food given to him. Even the salad has been covered with bacon and ham, which makes it inedible in his opinion. You'd think that his friends would care to learn little details like that about him. Alexis didn't dare look at Dirk after her little speech. She was sure he'd be furious with her. There was an unpleasant silence around the table for a moment, before Dr. Kippa stood up. Let me get you a fresh salad without meat on it, Dr. Blanton. He took the other man's plate and left the room, and Mrs. Kippa simply glared at Alexis. Dr. Johnson frowned at Dirk. Why did you never tell us you were vegetarian? I did. Every dinner party for the first 2 years I was in the department, but then I gave up on saying anything, because there was never anything I could eat. I watched all of you eat and pretended. Dirk wasn't sure if he was grateful to Alexis for her little tirade or upset with her. Either way, it didn't change anything. He would have to go forward. I'm very sorry that we didn't make you feel more welcome than that. Dr. Johnson shook his head. You do a lot to get along with others, and you shouldn't have to sit through long, dreadfully boring dinners with nothing you can eat. Dr. Kippa returned to the room, placing a fresh salad in front of Dirk. I have a veggie tray in the refrigerator and some frozen veggies we could steam for you if you'd like. I appreciate the offer. I'm just happy to have something I can eat for a change. Dirk picked up his fork and took a bite. He didn't like to be the center of attention, but it wasn't Alexis's fault. The conversation slowly started again, but Dirk was more included than he'd ever been. He'd always felt like an outsider within his own department, partially because he was a bachelor among married men, but also because he was a vegetarian, and no one seemed to care at all. When it was time to leave, Dr. Kippa walked them to the door. I am sorry, I never realized that we were starving you at these things. I asked my wife to call everyone with dietary preferences, but I don't think she ever did. He turned to Alexis. And I'm very sorry about the way my wife spoke to you. Alexis shrugged. I'm different than she is. A lot of women are intimidated by anyone who is even a little different. And I'm a lot different. I see that. You seem like a remarkable woman, Mrs. Blanton. I hope you'll come back. Maybe the next meal should be at our house, Alexis said softly. She'd rather host something ridiculous like this than have to attend. At least if she hosted, she would be able to make sure everyone was able to eat. I think we'd all like that. I look forward to your invitation. As they walked to the car, Alexis waited for Dirk to scold her. She had words saved up to tell him what a pompous ass he was, but she'd wait until he said something rude. Dirk pulled out of the driveway and around the corner before moving the car to the side of the road and putting it in park. Thank you. Alexis stared at him in shock. Why are you thanking me? I didn't humiliate you? He shrugged. You certainly made me the center of attention, which I don't particularly like, but you made everyone realize how they were dismissing me. They won't do that again. No, they won't. She grinned. I'm glad you're not angry with me. You thought I would be? I really wasn't sure. I figured you would. I mean, you made me wear this hideously frumpy outfit so I'd fit in with the other wives. I thought you'd prefer to fit in. You did? Dirk nodded. Why else would I care what you wear? I think you look beautiful in anything. But especially in nothing. Alexis grinned, leaning over to kiss him softly. Why don't we go out for a real meal? I'm still hungry, because I was only able to pick at my food realizing that hideous woman was watching my every move. Janice? Alexis nodded. She acted like I was beneath her because I work. I think that's absolutely ridiculous. I work hard because I choose to work. Not because I am forced to. I know that. He cupped the side of her cheek. I'm really proud of you for standing up to her. I know it couldn't have been easy for you. She shook her head. It was easier than you'd think. The hard part was keeping my mouth shut for as long as I did. I am the first one to tell my clients that if they don't speak up for what they want or need, it's their own fault when they don't get it. He smiled. I'm certainly glad you're on my side and not against me. Pizza? She asked. Yes, but let's go to a different place. I think we've scarred poor Jessica enough. She still comes to class, but she always looks like she wants to hide under the table. Maybe there's another waitress we could find who knows us both. We could torment her too. I like the way you think, Alexis. I really do. As they drove, she realized she might have assumed things about him that were wrong. He had certainly not reacted to her outburst at dinner the way she'd expected. Maybe he wasn't as uptight as she thought he was after all. She wanted to shout with joy. She didn't know if he'd changed or if she was simply bringing out a new side of him. Either way, this Dirk was so much more likable than the one she'd first married. Dr. Lachele did know her stuff. Dirk was perfect for her, even if she wasn't perfect for him. She'd have to call her and let her know. He kissed her again before going into the restaurant, and her hand was held tightly in his. They were married, and neither of them cared who thought anything about it. Chapter 10. When they got home that evening, she changed into pajamas and joined him in the living room where he was sitting with his laptop, typing something. She had her Kindle with her, and happily sat beside him reading while he typed away. When he was finally finished, his eyes met hers. I'm sorry, I made you go to that party tonight. I knew you'd hate it, but I wasn't sure how to get around it. She shrugged. I did hate it, but it's one of those things you do for someone you love. His eyes widened for a moment, but then he nodded. You meant to say for the man you're married to, correct? Not at all. I meant the man I love. The day we married, I was certain Dr. Lachele had lost her mind, but the kisses, well, after kissing you I knew that she was right. We belong together. Are you really trying to tell me you love me? He asked, astounded. He'd never seen himself as a lovable person. Even his parents had only really loved him because they were supposed to. I'm not trying. I'm doing it. I love you with everything inside me, Dirk. I want to strangle you in your sleep about half the time, but I don't do it out of love. It's not even fear of prison anymore. His lips curled up at that. I'm having a little trouble believing you could love a man like me, but I'll go with it. He took her hands in his. I love you too, Alexis. I was sure I'd made the biggest mistake of my life for the first week we were married, but I really enjoyed having made it. Now, I know that we really are meant to be together. Yes, we are. She took his laptop from him and replaced it with herself. I hated that party tonight. You were right about that. But I'm glad I said what I did. Our marriage is no one's business, but ours. Whether or not I stay home with our children is no one's business, but ours. Janice told me we were going to be close, but I don't see that ever happening. When I want to strangle her, there's no love inside me telling me not to do it. He threw back his head and laughed. It was the first real, belly laugh she'd heard from him. I don't know why you make me so happy, but you really do. You help me see the world in a different way. You help me feel things I never knew I could feel. She wiggled her brows at him. I didn't think I'd ever feel those things either. They are nice, though. He laughed. I mean emotionally, not physically. Though, you make me feel some pretty wonderful stuff physically as well. He pulled her to him, kissing her softly. I'm keeping you, by the way. And not just for the year I said I'd keep you for in that silly contract Dr. Lachele had us sign. I'm keeping you forever. Good, because you couldn't get rid of me if you tried. She shook her head. If someone had told me on our wedding day that less than a month later I'd be sitting on your lap feeling so many emotions, good emotions, toward you, I think I'd have called them a liar. But look at me now. I like looking at you, he winked. Maybe you should take off your top and I can look a little closer. She giggled, but jumped off his lap when there was a knock on the door. Are you expecting someone? He shook his head. No, and I wish I could say they'd go away, but both cars are in the driveway. They know we're here. She sighed. Go see who it is. She didn't feel comfortable sitting there with no bra on with someone else coming in, so she grabbed a blanket off the back of the couch and covered herself with it. Mrs. Kippa. We weren't expecting you tonight. Dirk wanted to tell her to go away, but he knew better. She was there to apologize, or at least she'd better be there to apologize. The woman was a menace. I'd like to speak with Alexis, please. Yes, of course. Dirk led her into the living room where Alexis was sitting waiting for him to come back. Janice looked at Alexis. I'm here to apologize for acting as if you were beneath me simply because you want to use your degree. It was wrong. She looked at Dirk. And I want to apologize to you for never listening when you said you needed a vegetarian dish at our dinner parties. I really should have. The words sounded forced to Alexis, as if they'd been written out for her and she'd been forced to memorize them. I forgive you, Alexis said quietly. She knew it was the only acceptable response. Shoving a pillow down someone's throat after they apologized just wasn't socially acceptable. I forgive you as well, Dirk said. He just wanted the woman gone so he could drag his wife off to the bedroom, and they could do his favorite newlywed thing. If you want or need help throwing that party you mentioned, let me know. I've planned a variety of parties over the years, and I'm happy to do anything I can to make the whole process easier for you. Janice smiled at Alexis, and though the smile looked a bit creepy and forced, Alexis nodded. Thank you for the offer, I may need to take you up on it. I've never planned an academic dinner party before. And when Alexis did plan one, it wouldn't be nearly as boring as Janice's had been. She already had some ideas for games to play before and after dinner. The men could talk boring during dinner, but as far as she was concerned, that was enough shop talk. Janice smiled. I will look forward to hearing from you then. After she was gone, Alexis rolled her eyes at Dirk. How long do you think it took her to memorize the apologies Dr. Kippa wrote out for her? Well, she's not terribly bright, so I'd say at least an hour. Dirk grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the bedroom. I'm done talking to and about that woman. She's not going to ruin the evening for me. My wife told me she loves me, and it's going to be the best night of my life. Alexis laughed. Well, my husband told me he loved me, so I think we should sit and watch romantic movies and light candles so it feels like a special night. Maybe later, he said with a grin. When they got into the bedroom, he pushed her into a sitting position on the bed. One thing I feel like we missed out on by marrying at the altar was a special proposal. Do you ever worry that you can't tell our kids and grandkids about how romantic it was when I got down on one knee and asked you to marry me? She shook her head. Not worried about that at all. I'm more worried about making it through until those kiddos are born. And what you'll eat while you're pregnant. He sighed. My kids are going to be carnivores. It'll be all right. He slowly stripped. I'm sure it will. When Alexis woke the following morning, she was alone in bed, which surprised her. She and Dirk had been quite active during the night, and she'd been sure he'd sleep late too. She noticed a note on his pillow and read it, marveling at the bad penmanship of her mostly perfect husband. My love, went to the store really quick. I'll be back by 11. Let's go for a hike today. Will you pack us a picnic lunch? Dirk the Daring. She giggled softly. He'd signed his note Dirk the Daring? What had gotten into that man? She got out of bed and made herself breakfast, hating that she was eating it alone. They always had breakfast together, and she even got up early every morning so they could. Just as she was packing his backpack with their lunch, she heard the door open and close. I'm about ready. Packing the lunch now. Good. Dirk walked into the kitchen and kissed her softly. Good morning. Good morning. Where did you go? I'm not ruining my surprise. She shrugged. Well, I'm ready. Hike with me? Sure. They'd taken different trails during the time they'd been married, but this time he took her back to the same trail they'd first hiked. All the way up? She asked, already looking forward to it. This was the longest, most challenging trail they did, and she couldn't wait to get to the top for their lunch. He nodded, starting up the trail, and she followed closely behind. They ran into a few people on the way up, and once they got to the point where they could see the whole city beneath them, they both stopped and looked out over the beautiful view. This is always going to be our place in my mind, he said softly. This is where I brought you when we finally discovered we had something in common. It's special to me. She turned to him with tears in her eyes, surprised he was being so romantic. It wasn't in his nature at all. Me, too. Alexis couldn't believe her eyes when he dropped to one knee, right there in the dirt. Alexis, I love you more than I ever dreamed it was possible to love a woman. Will you spend the rest of your life with me? In his hand, he held a ring box with a beautiful diamond ring, surrounded by tiny sapphires. She laughed. I think the proposal is supposed to come before the wedding, but yes, I will spend the rest of my life with you. I cannot imagine a day without you in it. He got to his feet and slipped the ring on her finger, then lowered his head and kissed her softly. Thank you for making me the happiest man alive. I thought I was content before meeting you, but I never could be again, not after knowing what true love is. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him with everything she had in her. Not again. A familiar voice came from behind them. Alexis looked to find Desiree on the path with them. Maybe one of us should find a new path, she said softly. Desiree laughed. It's good to know you're still happy, she said. I'm going to turn around and go right back down the mountain. You never saw me. Dirk looked into Alexis's eyes and shook his head. Why can't we make out without running into someone we know? Alexis shrugged. Well, you keep kissing me in public places. Don't you know we have a bed for that? Alexis was sure Desiree was still close enough to hear their laughter, but it didn't matter. What did matter was that she was happy, married to the man she loved and always would. Epilogue. A year later, Alexis stood looking at the nursery. She and Dirk had been working on it from the moment they'd found out she was pregnant, and she loved it. She'd gone with a Disney theme, because really? Who didn't love Disney? Dirk had been thrilled with their trip and the research he was able to do as part of it. He'd agreed without needing convincing to a Disney nursery. 4 months ago, they'd found out it was a girl, and the nursery had switched from Mickey Mouse to Minnie Mouse. Pink was the name of the game. On a shelf over the bed was a pair of tiny little mouse ears with the name Alexandra stitched onto the back. They'd decided to name their daughter after Dirk's mother, and they both loved the name. There were minis all over the walls, and tiny little princesses as the border. She knew a lot of women thought that teaching your daughter to be a princess was a bad thing, because women shouldn't need to be rescued. She didn't care, though, because who didn't love a Disney princess? She ran her hand over the sheets they'd carefully selected for the crib and turned on the video monitor. They had interviewed a nanny, and she was ready to start when Alexis was ready for her, which would be as soon as the baby was born. She wanted to work closely with the woman and see how she handled her baby. She was still in the nursery when Dirk got home from work that afternoon. He wrapped his arms around her big belly, holding her tightly. She won't come any faster, just because you're hanging out in her nursery all the time. Alexis smiled. No, but she should be here any day now. My doctor's appointment went well, and he said I'm really close. He offered to induce, but I want to wait a little longer. I can understand that. She turned in his arms and kissed him. Can you believe that we're going to be parents? He grinned. We've only been married a year, but it does feel like it's time, doesn't it? He looked around the room. Is there anything else we need in here? She shook her head. No, nothing at all. My mom is bouncing off the walls. Her first grandchild. I'll bet Dr. Lachele is crowing about having another matrimony munchkin, too, doesn't she always? Alexis rested her head on his shoulder. She did good, though. No one would have married us off, including us. And look how happy we are. Are you ready for your baby shower tomorrow? She wrinkled her nose. I am. Mostly. I'm glad my 3 closest friends will be here, and it won't just be the academic ladies. She'd mostly made her peace with the wives of his colleagues in the past year, but she didn't like to be with them all the time. I'm glad that your female colleagues are coming as well. They're more my speed. I don't know why I bought into the idea that a professor had to have a wife who was only devoted to his career. I think we have the perfect arrangement. I love you with everything inside me, Dirk. I can't wait to love the little girl we're bringing into the world. There will not be a child more loved than our little Alexandra. He kissed her forehead, dreaming of holding his child in his arms. It was time to send Dr. Lachele yet another thank you email. He couldn't count the number he'd sent in the past year, but it could never be enough. She'd given him love and family. Who could ask for more in life?